We have more seats next to me, so we have more seats next to me, and I promise I will share my mic. And then Tony will share his mic too, right? So for the folks that are on the phone, people are getting situated. So we'll just give everybody maybe like one more minute for everybody to be able to get a handout, and also to be able to sign in, and also be able to create your name tent. For the transit agencies that participated our first transit agency subcommittee meeting, you've already had your name tents made, so feel free to pick those up from there. And also for the members that are on the phone, we updated one of the handouts this morning, and the updated version is posted on our website. That is the cost discussion document. And we have more seats here that feel free to utilize them. And one more seat here too. And for the folks that won't be able to sit at the table, we also have roving microphones for you to use.
I'm going to wait a little bit, but they don't have to be all seated to
Right.
kind of just do the
Right.
standard housekeeping stuff.
Okay.
And then, but you can wait a little bit.
Yeah, I think we'll give them a couple more minutes. We do have a sign-in sheet in the back, so if you didn't find your name there, please fill in the blank for us.
Good morning. This is Art Dowles with VTA.
This is Tony Brazil. We'll be starting in a few minutes. We're still milling about. So those of you who are participating via conference call, I just want to confirm you can hear me. And then we'll start with introductions. So that was someone with VTA?
Yes.
Great. Okay. This is for me, it's first time kind of using this setup here, so we want to make sure everybody can hear. Thank you.
Left Ankle ABTA.
Charlie Carr from Cummins Westport.
Greg Mann from Allison.
The basic housekeeping
Okay.
here, and say, while you guys are situated, we'll
Right,
start
yeah,
with the
yeah, okay. Okay, we still have a few people that need to get situated, but I think we'll start doing some of the housekeeping thing here. In case of an emergency or a drill, everybody has to evacuate. And our designated meeting area is Cesar Chavez Park, just across street from us. And I think it's a common sense that we don't use the elevator, we'll just take the stairs. Downstairs, we have a cafeteria in case anybody needs a refreshment. And also for restroom, it's if you go out of this double door, turn left. After you pass the green chandelier, you turn left again. It's on your right-hand side. The drinking fountain is also there. And today's meeting is going to be recorded, and we're going to work with other divisions here at ARB to try to, use their software to have the recording posted on our website, so that in case anybody missed today's meeting or want to kind of revisit some of the issues that we've discussed, there's a good area to a place to go to. And for today's meeting, it's going to run from 10 to 1. And since we have a packed room here, and also we have a pretty busy agenda, so we'll try to kind of stick to the meeting time frame as much as possible. And also, since we have some folks on the phone, so please make sure that when you talk, you first identify yourself and your affiliation, and make sure that your microphone is on, the green light means on, and the red light means off, and you do want to talk into the microphone directly. And also for folks that are sitting in the back of the room, we also have roving microphones for you. And also for people sitting in that row, we have some of the roving microphones for you to use as well. So without further ado, we do have handouts in the back, so please make sure that you get a copy of each. And without further ado, I think we're going to start.
And it's the people online that they're on the webpage.
Oh, yes. And also, last night staff sent out the meeting materials. They're also posted on our website. There are 5 documents there that includes the agenda and also discussion guide. And also the draft transit survey and the draft discussion topics on costs. And also, we also have the tentative agenda for our technology symposium, also posted on the website. Okay, shall we start?
Yeah. Okay, so we'd like to begin with the meeting. This is clearly related to our advanced clean transit rulemaking, and so the work group here, one of the things we're trying to do today is try to go over some details and issues I think that we want to address. And what I'd like to kind of begin with is what, after introductions, is to give you a little bit of an overview of other things that are happening kind of at the same time. As Yachin mentioned, the technology symposium will cover a number of topics, so I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on those today. And then maybe we would defer topics that are related to what will be discussed there for future meetings. So I'm Tony Brazil. I'm the branch chief of the heavy duty diesel implementation branch. My group is overseeing the amendments to the fleet rule for transit agencies, or what we're calling the advanced clean transit regulation. We're revisiting how we can get emissions reductions from the transit fleets in particular. And so the affected parties are clearly the transits and the vehicle providers, but also any private companies that are contracting bus services could be affected by the proposed rule. This meeting is meant to be somewhat informal. We will be doing workshops and other things to have an exchange of information. The group is fairly large, but I think we have a pretty wide representation, and I think that's a positive. And I'd just like to begin with having the members who are committed to participating and reviewing the documents from the meetings to introduce themselves. The meeting is open to anybody who's interested in listening in, so we do have the webcast for that. We're welcome to be here and others to come if they want to be in person to hear the discussion, and we'll try to do, as Yachin mentioned, our time is tight. So we're going to try to manage time as best we can. And so we'll try to have periods where we'll just stop to open for questions or comments kind of at the end of a topic area that I think anybody could address, not just the members. So that's kind of the way we would like to try to manage the meeting. So want to begin going around the room?
Hi, I'm Ted Harris, a principal at California Strategies and part of the Proterra team.
Good morning. My name is Todd Campbell. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs for Clean Energy Fuels.
Good morning. Henry Hoga with South Coast Air Quality Management District.
Good morning. Tim Carmichael with Southern California Gas Company. I'm standing in for Geraldine Mendoza, who wasn't able to make it today.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Shetterly. I'm with Complete Coachworks.
And I'm Mike Wiley. I'm the General Manager of Transit here in Sacramento, and I'm also Chair of the California Transit Association.
Michael Pimentel, Legislative and Regulatory Advocate with the California Transit Association.
Monty Cox, City of Visalia in Tulare County.
I'm Paul Jablonski. I'm the CEO of the San Diego Metropolitan Transit System and also chair of the Transit Advisory Subcommittee working with CARB on these regulations, representing transit in the state of California.
I'm Rick Ramasier, General Manager at County Connection Central Contra Costa Transit Authority. I also serve as the current chair of the CALAC board.
Hi, I'm Vincent Verna. I'm the Director of Electrical Engineering for GILIG.
Good morning, David Savoya in the Electrification and Alternative Fuels team at Pacific Gas and Electric.
I'm Judy Dennis. I'm the Sales Manager for NovaBus.
Nico Bouwkamp, the Technical Program Manager of the California Fuel Cell Partnership and lead of the bus team.
Good morning. We'll try that again. I'm David Warren. I'm the Director of Sustainable Transportation at New Flyer. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Grant. I'm the principal at Zen Clean Energy Solutions.
I'm Daljit Bawa, Ballot Power Systems, Segment Manager, Heavy Duty Fuel Cell Module. Thank you for the opportunity.
Jim Patchen, Chief Operating Officer of AC Transit.
AC Nishadi, Vice President of Sales for BYD, Coach and Bus.
Good morning, Cliff Thorne from Orange County Transportation Authority.
Excuse me, Mike Hernandez.
Andrew Papson, Electric Bus Program Manager with Foothill Transit.
Bernie Kotlier, Executive Director, California Labor Management Cooperation Committee.
Morning, Stephen Miller. I'm with Golden Gate Transit, and I'm also leading up the subcommittee, transit subcommittee, working on life cycle cost modeling.
Kevin Cook, Regional Manager with Cummins Westport.
Good morning, Chris Young with Cummins Pacific. Ed Lovelace, CTO with XL Hybrids.
Good morning, I'm Mike Maskeler with Wave.
Kent Leacock, Director of Government Relations, Regulatory Relations, and Public Policy for Proterra.
This is Yachin Chao. I'm the manager for Zero Emission Truck and Bus program here under Tony's branch.
And then are there any members in the audience that weren't able to get a seat at the table? If we could pass the microphone so they could introduce themselves as well.
Zach Hahn with BYD Bus and Coach.
Judy Vaquero Fry with Antelope Valley Transit Authority. I'm here for Len Engel, who I believe is on the phone.
Dave Harbor, Director of Bus Maintenance, Sacramento Regional Transit.
Jimmy O'Day, I'm a Vehicles Analyst with Union Concerned Scientists.
Brad Edgar, 44 Energy Technologies.
while we're getting to the other side of the room, we could have the people who are on the phone potentially identify themselves again. Thank you.
Len Engel, Executive Director at Antelope Valley Transit Authority.
Charlie Carr, Director Industry Relations for Cummins Westport.
Art Dowse, Operations Manager for VTA.
Greg Mann, Allison Transmission Regulatory Affairs.
Anna Goldsmith, California Electric Transportation Coalition.
Is there anybody else on the, participating by phone? Okay.
Diana Vasquez, Policy Advocate for Sierra Club, California.
Sharon Cooney, San Diego MTS.
Larry Winnook, Senior Director, Bus Programs, CalStart.
Cal Silcox, PG&E.
Ryan Kenny, Clean Energy.
Doug Cameron, Clean Energy. Michael Coates, Volvo Group.
Leslie Goodbody, California Air Resource Board.
Jing Yuan, California Air Resources Board. I work for the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program.
Shirin Bafjani, the lead staff of Advanced Clean Transit.
Jordan Romalingam, staff on the Advanced Clean Transit Reg.
Jennifer Lee, staff.
Renee Latawa, staff.
Okay, so I'd like to kind of jump right into the agenda. And just before I begin, we do have a fair number of items I think we want to cover. Is there anything big that we missed on the agenda that we want to touch on today or make sure we budget some time for? I think there's quite a bit to cover. I know we're not going to cover everything. Oh,
yeah, I wanted to introduce myself real quick too. I'm Danielle Chambers with the Compliance Assistance and Outreach Branch.
Okay. So as you've gathered, the way we've tried to organize the meeting, we're going to obviously be recording it. And we're trying to make this as transparent a process as possible. We do want to work out a lot of details as best we can. As you might be familiar, we've already started the Transit Agency Subcommittee that is actually to report into this group as an overall body, but that the focus of the subcommittee, on the Transit Subcommittee, would be more on the transit-related issues, some of the operational concerns and other things that we can potentially address to address the transit fleet issues and concerns and data gathering. And so we'll report into what's been happening there. And then to the extent that there are other topics that we think make sense to be handled as part of that group, I think that'll be part of the discussion today. What we're trying to do here is make sure that more information can be available. ARB's been meeting with a lot of individual transits, different groups, different associations, but if you weren't present at all those meetings, you're not clear what's actually happening and what we're gathering and how we're proceeding. So that is one of the basic goals here. We are trying to make sure this is an open and frank discussion. Of course, we're available at any time when other related issues come up or other information you want to make available to us. Continue to do that, so we're not trying to make the process very formal. We were trying to keep the group relatively smaller to make sure it's as productive as can be, but we also wanted to make sure we had as many interested parties and stakeholders as we could in the process. So the group is a little bit big, but we didn't really have to exclude anybody or any representation of any kind to try to manage the size, and so I think we potentially found the best balance that we could. And again, people who aren't able to attend in person would still be able to follow during the meeting time, and in the future we intend to or plan to, again, if they're held here, that we would again record them so that somebody who did miss the meeting would still be able to watch a video, and we will have a meeting summary that we will post as well that would kind of describe what the conclusions were and what the next steps are going to be. So what we have a number of handouts. We're not going to discuss them all in detail, but we wanted to make sure that you had them, potentially comment back. So we have the agenda that we posted online, and we have a discussion guide that frankly just has a little more detail. It's so that you don't have to be worried about writing as many notes. Frankly, we thought it might be helpful to make sure that different topics were covered, and to the extent that the description is adequate, then maybe we can move on to issues and not have questions on, or as many questions on what we are discussing. So are there any comments in general about how we're organizing the meeting and trying to make sure that there's an active participation and information sharing? Comments? Okay. And so then just to touch on, the members of the work group, we intend to put the meeting summaries together, send them out for comment. Our expectation is to provide essentially a week for feedback in case we didn't cover something correctly. So members would be expected to do that. Like the Transit Agency Subcommittee, we determined that for certain issues and items, it would be a lot more efficient between meetings to get a smaller group together to work on some details, sort them out, and then bring them back. So I anticipate that'll be probably something we would want to do here. Okay, so I will kind of be working from the discussion guide. That reason we kind of use this discussion guide, it really is following the agenda, but we also have links to different documents that are available, and so that would be a lot more convenient to have it something you could click through and have as a reference. So I'd like to kind of just quickly touch on the Advanced Clean Transit Technology Symposium that will be next week. We want everybody to attend, but we will be hearing, we have a copy of the short agenda. Don't necessarily want to go over it in great detail because you do have it in front of you, but that will be a forum where we will hear from some of the transits who have been operating zero emission buses. We expect to hear from what's happening on standardization of charging and things of that nature. AirB has been collecting data. I think we will have NREL come to describe the performance and other data that they have been collecting on zero emission buses. We will have two sessions, one on fuel and technologies, including infrastructure on site, what you need to, as far as infrastructure and how to address different issues that you're going to encounter when you are ultimately switching to a different fuel, whether it be a gaseous fuel or electricity or something else. Is there anything else I need to touch on? So I do want to say that because of probably the right people in the room here, are one of the sessions we do think we want to have representation from one of the renewable fuel suppliers. We do have some covered in different sessions, but for that particular session, so those of you who are renewable fuel suppliers will want to touch bases with you. So Todd, you have a comment?
Thank you, Tony. Just real quick, are you envisioning also for that technology symposium having anyone present on the near zero or low NOx engine technology in combination with?
Yes, Cummins is coming to present low NOx technology, and potentially they may even bring in a truck with a low NOx engine, right? Yes.
Yeah, we will have vehicles, a staging area for vehicles for those who do want to bring them. Also, if people have either poster boards or materials to bring, that we'll have a space out at the open area there for those kinds of materials.
And also, I have my business cards also in the back. So for the folks who want to kind of talk to me in details afterwards, please feel free to grab a card.
Yeah. And so rather than going over this in any more detail, there will be some topics that will be directly covered there. And so to the extent that we get into those areas, I will try to guide the discussion to let's maybe see what's going to happen next week, and then we'll discuss after, rather than spending a lot of time potentially discussing items that will give better information on next week. Okay. And our plan is to, just to make sure everybody's aware, our plan is to put a more detailed agenda for that symposium next week that would identify the actual individuals and the topics that they will be covering. Those are some of the details we're still trying to iron out. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Yeah, it's on the 8th. A week after, okay. Sorry. I'm thinking everything's blending together for me lately. I was like, yes, on the 8th. Okay. Where do we go to next? Okay, so so are there any questions on that? Yeah. So we have the meeting on the 8th. We are planning to do continued work group meetings. So the Transit Agency Subcommittee, we discussed that essentially every 2 months we would probably get together. That would allow enough time to work out some issues in between. There will be another meeting on the 9th of February with the transit group, and we'll touch on that when we hear the summary. We anticipate that it would make sense to have work group meetings that would also be probably on roughly a 2-month basis. So that's kind of what we're expecting to do. Because of the group size here, with the Transit Agency Subcommittee, we are expecting to have different locations for those meetings. But for this group size, I'm not sure if that's going to be practical to move it around and be able to still record and webcast. So those may end up being predominantly held here. Let's see. We are also and if you're not aware already, we are going to provide an update on the Advanced Clean Transit rulemaking effort to our board in February. It's just an informational item to kind of give them a status update. We are looking to do workshops in the April timeframe and then potentially again in the summer. And we are still on schedule to take a recommendation to our board later this year. And so there's quite a few issues and details that we want to be able to sort out, obviously between now and then. So I felt it would be probably pretty important to make sure that we kind of recap what we had actually proposed back in May. I think there's been a little bit of confusion as to what we are proposing or how it fits into the grand scheme of ARBs and the state strategy to meet the various goals. Oh, Nico, you have a question or comment?
It works.
Okay, I think this works.
Okay.
Quick question about your comments about meeting frequency. You said once every 2 months for this working group, and then once every 2 months a public meeting as well.
No, so for this work group, we're thinking roughly every 2 months would be about right, a decent gap. We also have the subcommittee that's focused more on the transit issues and concerns and data gathering from the transit kind of effort, that would also be in roughly a 2-month cycle. And so I think if we manage it appropriately, then we would have any subcommittee meetings before the next work group meeting, so that when we come back for the next time that we would have, the subgroup would have more information to share. Then we will be, and in addition to that or separate from that, we will be doing more formal workshops where we'll be going over a regulatory proposal more specifically, not just the data gathering or information gathering and sharing kind of approach, where we're trying to do that more now so that when we do have a proposal that we have more people on the same page or have just better information for discussing a proposal and a framework. Okay. So I'll just see how we're doing on time already. We're doing good. All right. Yeah. Good. So I'll just give you a quick rundown on what we proposed in last year, and that's essentially what we've been working from.
I'm sorry, Tony, to just a short disruption here. We noticed that some of your page 2 of your discussion guide is blank.
Uh-oh.
It wasn't intentional. I blend this on our copier, but we're going to bring a copy of that page down here in a second.
I'll go slower so we don't get to page 2 because I don't have it either.
You got it. You can have mine.
Okay. But so just a quick summary. So our May proposal was accompanied with a discussion document, but essentially what we're proposing is the Advanced Clean Transit rulemaking is essentially the first rulemaking that we're looking at, incorporating a lot of zero emission vehicles, and our end goal is to have all buses transition to zero emissions. And this is the beginning of the rulemaking aspect of that. There's clearly funding already available for that for trucks, buses, hybrids, and other things. And we will be continuing to pursue future rulemakings that will affect trucks, that will be looking at advancing both low NOx engines, more use of renewable fuels, and zero emission technologies. And as you may have heard in freight strategy, mobile source strategy, other ARB approaches and policies, our basic approach is that we need low NOx engines, renewable fuels in a lot of places, but we should go to zero emissions everywhere we can. And so they're all an important part of the strategy. And so I think part of it was, and we anticipate there will be a lot of trucks and heavy duty vehicles that are not going to have a zero emission option for quite some time, and that having the cleanest combustion technology is going to be the best thing there. But where we do see opportunity for zero emissions, that we would want to pursue an approach that kind of uses all of the above. For the transit rule, we look at the transit buses as nearly an ideal category to look at zero emissions, and we believe that zero emissions can be used essentially everywhere, and we're working towards that discussion. And that is a fundamental approach that we're taking. We've had discussions about how do we do that and what's the best strategy, and that's kind of why we're having these meetings, why we've been meeting with the transits, is how do we meet that goal? What's the best strategy to do it? What's the timelines that we shoot for? And central to all of that is going to be cost. We do see costs coming down over time for advanced technologies of all kinds. We expect more technologies to come forward, and setting up a plan that is long-term, because again, we're looking at 2040, I think provides some certainty for people to plan. But there are things that we can address in the rule to address either unexpected consequences, or if things don't play out a particular way, that I think we can address a number of issues within the rule structure. So we did discuss some of those. So our basic proposal was to begin essentially in 2018 with zero emission bus purchases at some percentage, with the goal of going to 100% by 2040. We did not specify any numbers in between, because I think the timing of that's going to be very important, and a variety of issues, including costs, are going to be part of us putting out a proposal. But part of that does appear to be missed in the discussion is that starting in 2017 was the original proposal that transit fleets would buy renewable fuel immediately for when they renewed any fuel contract for replacing conventional CNG or diesel. Would retain the same fuel. You wouldn't have to fuel switch to do that. And then that if there are low NOx engines available for the buses that you're buying, that you would buy the low NOx engine is essentially the proposal. So that's central to it. So the low NOx part and the renewable fuel part isn't all that controversial. So the discussion always reverts back to the zero emission aspect of the rule. So that's essentially what we had, and I think that kind of provides a summary. The other pieces that we did workshop and we're still working towards are clearly, if transit fleets can get together to meet the same requirement, we're more than supportive of that. That's what the original rule had. That we are looking at other ways to enhance mobility in general, and if those can be incorporated to potentially spread out the zero emission bus transition, that would be appropriate. If you can get similar or better emissions reductions through other ways and improving transit efficiencies, then we want to be supportive of that. Figuring out how to do that is actually where the challenge is. Another part of our basic challenge is that, as I indicated, there are multiple ARB strategies to foster the market for renewable fuels, cleaner combustion, and zero emissions. And there is some double counting issues that we need to be able to avoid. So we can't exactly claim that we're getting reductions in one rule if it's already expected to happen with a different rule, even though we think it's the right market signal to say we not only do we want people to supply renewable fuel, for example, we want to make sure that there's some certainty that people will be buying it too. And so those are some, I think, of the issues and nuances that frankly make this a little more challenging, and I think is where some of the concern about, hey, you're not approaching this the right way, but when you put it in context of where things get accounted for, then it does potentially change the way you approach it. And I think so we'll get into some of those discussions too. And then lastly, we had discussed, there's an SB 375 that has a regional planning element to it. to predominantly get people out of cars into transit and other more efficient ways for for land use planning and other things that would reduce overall greenhouse gas footprint to the extent that we can incorporate ways that a region can meet the similar goals that we're trying to achieve with the bus effort as part of a regional strategy that we're, again, trying to pursue what are ways that that could work so there could, in essence, be a custom plan that makes sense for the region that still meets the same goals that we have. So that's kind of what we're working towards. And then I guess I'll leave the other part to the Transit Agency Subcommittee. So are there any questions about just the basic framework that we're AirB's starting from? I think there's other issues that we're exploring, and we'll touch on those in a minute. Any comments, questions? Okay. All right, so is the next item, that's number 4. I said that's a subcommittee. So data collection is next. Make sure I don't, number 2, okay. Yes. Okay, oh, I'm sorry, and the one I just missed is, I think one of the discussions we've had with some of the transit fleets, it's with some of the technology and their specific situation that they anticipate they're gonna have. Barriers such as footprint on existing properties to add additional infrastructure, potential concerns with certain battery buses in particular not having the range they might need for all of their routes. And so we think that there's ways in the rule to address, in essence, off-ramp provisions. We don't want to impact service in a negative way. And to the extent that a fleet is in the situation where the buses that are available for them would not meet their needs. So to me, I look at that as most transits are going to have a way to use existing technology buses in their fleet, but at some point they will run to a situation where either their range or needs or vehicle types that are available might not fit their specific need. And I think we can address those kinds of things in the rule. If it doesn't exist, it's not technologically feasible for them, that we would explore those. And so that's one of the areas I think that we're also trying to explore how that could work. And again, I think another important message is that we are obviously looking at a statewide approach. We're going to obviously do costs statewide, but we think it's critical to look at costs for individual fleets and individual situations, and ultimately how we end up crafting a rule so that a fleet that is, for lack of a better term, more of an outlier doesn't get put in a situation that's not practical to meet the general goal. We've done that in other rules, and just to give you a frame of reference, in our filter requirements for truck and bus rule, which I also oversee, we identify you have to do filters based on a model year schedule, but if there's literally no filter for your engine or the ones that are available can't be safely installed, we have a mechanism to address that and provide additional time because it's not a practical option for them to meet the requirement. So I suspect we'll be discussing that and developing some ideas in that nature. And that basically allows us to put forward a proposal, and then at some point, if the technology doesn't advance as we're expecting, then those provisions might apply. If technology advances faster, then they won't apply at all. So that's what we're approaching there. So now I'll switch over to data collection. ARB is collecting quite a bit of information. NREL, we have an NREL contract. The Foothill report has recently been published. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Okay, so it's yesterday. And in case you're not aware, there's ARB has a solicitation out for predominantly buses right now, and as part of that contract, any bus under that, any drayage truck or off-road equipment that is going to be funded through the programs for the other solicitations that were just the end of last year and into this year, we will be collecting data from a variety of vehicle types, obviously including zero emission vehicles, but also some other low NOx and advanced technology vehicles. So we will continue to be gathering performance and operational information for those kinds of vehicles, and are interested in anybody else, any data that we're not necessarily part of, is being gathering more information on what's happening. So I think that covers those. Okay, and then just because costs are so important, we just have here item C on the little handout, the various sources of funding that are available. I'm not going to discuss them in any detail right now, because one of our basic missions is let's iron out a lot of details that are either fleet specific, vehicle specific, on costs, what appropriate projections are in the future. That's one of the items we want to discuss today for vehicles and infrastructure as well, so that we can have a very good handle on what total cost of ownership is, what costs would look like from year to year given any approach, including if you guys have estimates as to what a low NOx engine is going to cost compared to a conventional one. We're interested in knowing that. We have an estimate for hardware, but that doesn't include a lot of factors. So those are the things we want to make sure that we have first before we then start talking about, okay, what are the funding sources that could potentially offset it? How could funding programs in the future be modified? Until we have a decent handle on what the costs are, it's a little premature to discuss. But the links are there, so anybody who's interested can learn more about the programs. So any questions about that approach? Alrighty. Okay, so I'd like to turn over for the Transit Agency Subcommittee update to Paul to kind of just give a quick summary.
I'm sorry, Tony, we do have
missing?
one question from the internet.
Okay.
So this is a question from UC Santa Cruz asking if any of these ARB's funding opportunities can be applied to them, because they are also wanting to convert their, I think maybe their diesel fleet to 100% electric fleet. So Leslie, can you speak to it? What kind of funding opportunities there are from ARB that can be utilized by a university's shuttle fleet? Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
mic.
please do speak into a mic.
Hello? I think the best thing to look at is C on page 2 of the handout. Item number 3, that solicitation closes today, and I can't really speak to that, but ARB's HVIP program, item number 4, we're going to be expanding that program, or our proposal for our 2016-17 funding plan is to expand that program to apply a lot more funds towards and HVIP vouchers towards transit buses. And with that funding, while there is additional money that goes to buses that provide benefits to disadvantaged communities, there's also vouchers that are available for areas like Santa Cruz where they might not meet the disadvantaged community requirement. So we're going to encourage people to look to HVIP in the coming several months as we develop the plan, and then after that for voucher incentives.
Great, thanks a lot. So Teresa, if you're still on the phone, if you're still watching the webcast, please contact us offline if you have any further questions. Thanks.
And I'd just like to add, so item 2 on the low carbon fuel standard program, we will be discussing that a little more in detail, and there is a financial benefit associated with operating zero emission vehicles that a transit or an entity could take advantage of, and we'll discuss that in a little more detail later too. So shifting to the Transit Agency Subcommittee, Paul, you want to take it?
First off, I'd like to thank the Air Resources Board for creating this process to allow us to collaborate in the ACT rulemaking. The establishment of this advisory group was something that I had recommended last fall, and I want to thank you for helping to create it and make it part of the process, because we know all this takes time and money and et cetera, and we appreciate that. I think, you know, we as transit operators in the state of California understand probably better than most your agency's mission with respect to climate change. We've been working with CARB for many years now, and have been early innovators and adopters of all kinds of technology.
Paul, before I move on, I just want to make sure, for those of you on the phone, are you able to hear Paul?
No.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, so
I'll
I'm
hold
not-
this closer.
Thank you. Go.
You know, starting with alternative fuels, certainly like compressed natural gas. You know, we've been tremendous reducers of particulate emissions, tremendous reducers of NOx, CNG going to green gas and biogas, and we've made considerable improvements in air quality over the years. And even with this new technology, we are supportive of zero-emission technologies. And we share your interest in seeing that those improve and are ready for commercial application. However, we've given careful thought to what zero-emission bus purchasing requirements would look like, and we want to make sure on behalf of our customers and the people we serve that there are no unintended consequences. And, you know, at least for a place like San Diego, and I'll talk personally in the system that we run, 70% of the people that we carry do not have cars. Yet most of them go to use our system every day to go to work, and so they rely on it. So any technology that would be a considerable drain on what is already limited sources gets our attention very quickly. So we want to work in this group to establish these costs and make these known, and to make sure that, and I think even CARB agrees that we don't want any unintended consequences of this regulation. So I know I was handed a question over the internet, what role does a transit agency subcommittee play? Our role really is, if you think about all of this, and there's a lot of people around the table, we representing transit in the state of California would be the implementers of this. We would be also the buyers, the purchasers of all the technology. And so we probably have the greatest role because we have to perform. And while we are very, very supportive and always have been environmentally sensitive in our mission and our marketing and everything else, our primary mission is to carry people. People who, in many cases, have no other choice. And so when we are faced with new regulations, we always have to understand what the impacts on our service and our mission will be. And preliminarily, we are very, very concerned about what the costs are and whether the technology is truly ready and what the impacts of that technology are on the way we conduct our business. So to that end, we have established, we had our first meeting among the transit systems in Orange County last month, or earlier this month, it's still January, and we established two subcommittees. One of those subcommittees, chaired by Steve Miller from Golden Gate Transit, is dealing with the costs and developing life cycle costing and determining the assumptions to be used in a cost model. Steve has worked as the subcommittee on zero emission bus for the California Transit Association now for several years, has a lot of invested in it, is working on an Excel spreadsheet that will be interactive, that will allow each of the systems to plug in their data and come up with costs. So he is working on that subcommittee. The other subcommittee is, for lack of a better word, dealing with some of the more policy issues regarding implementation. And after we understand the costs, we look at what can be done in terms of implementation, what off-ramps might exist if there are adverse impacts, et cetera. And Sharon Cooney from our agency in San Diego is heading up that committee. I think both subcommittees have met at least once, with more planned in this next week. And we are preparing for our next meeting, which is on February 9th here, following the symposium on the 8th. So while we've started work, we have nothing to report as yet until the subcommittees get at least a couple of meetings under their belt and provide to us information on where they've gotten prior to February 9th. The other part of this question is who are the members of the subcommittee? Is there a roster available? There may be a sign-in sheet that was available at the last. I mean, there are some members that we know are going to be there all the time. Certainly myself as chair, and Rick Ramercier from Central Contra Costa is the secondary chair. And that was set up on purpose that we would have one system from the north and one system from the south, one smaller system and one larger system, because the implementations challenges and concerns differ between small system operations and large system operations. We know Mike Wiley, representing California Transit Association, and Michael Pimentel will be at all the meetings. But from a transit agency perspective, we're pretty much open for people if they want to come to any of our meetings. There's no definitive roster. It's just kind of open. We know that Los Angeles is very interested, and they're key because, you know, they've been testing BYD buses. I know that Pasadena is going to be there also because they've got experience with Proterra buses. I know that Antelope Valley will be there also, considering that BYD is located up there, and they've already stated that they want to go that path. So we're inviting everybody that wants to attend those meetings.
Correct.
Is fine.
Yeah, and then just for the benefit of those are remote, but those of you who are present, we are putting all of the meeting information on the same page. So the subcommittee meeting information is on the same page that our same website that we have information about this work group. And we did post the minutes from the last, or not the minutes, the summary of the last meeting, and it does identify who was participating in that meeting as well. So that anybody who's interested can see there was at least 20 people from the various transits, including some of the smallest in the state.
If I may, Michael Pimentel with the California Transit Association. Did want to make one degree of clarification with regards to the subgroups that the association has at this point spearheaded. We do have tentative lists of individuals that are involved in that process. We've had some conversations internally with some of our manufacturer members, and we're looking to open up these groups. So if folks are interested in getting involved, there is the opportunity. Again, we've got two subgroups, one dealing with life cycle costs and the other dealing with, as Paul framed it, more of the policy implementation questions, dealing with flexibility options and off-ramps.
You guys want to touch on a couple of the other items? So I think one of the main things I think Steve Miller is kind of heading up is actually gathering baseline information for operation and maintenance costs for conventional buses, as well as any zero emission buses that some transits already have. Details like, you know, what do you pay for electricity to compress natural gas? What's your fuel cost? What's your operation and maintenance of your stations? What's the best way to compare that to some of the unknowns in terms of future cost? I think one of the approaches to kind of address the maintenance cost issue that we're looking to embark upon, which I think the manufacturers may be a key part of, is what are scheduled repairs and expected repairs over the life of a bus of different technologies, and then can we identify basic or approximate costs associated with that to then use that as a basis? Because one of the things I think we've encountered is AirB does have data from different transits on maintenance and operating costs, but one of the basic concerns is it's going to vary depending on your terrain and operation. It's going to vary by bus age. So if we have a data set on older buses, it's not going to be necessarily a good average to use to represent the full life. And so existing data is helpful. I think it'll help bound it, but there's no one data source, or frankly right now we don't have enough data sources to put them all together to come up with a reasonable trend or expectation. And frankly, I think maintenance practices do vary quite a bit among the transits, and so there's going to be some variation there. I think the bottom line is there's always going to be variation in variables and everything that we're doing. But we do want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. I think one thing that will be helpful is to ultimately do bounding or do a range of cost analysis to kind of bound what's a pretty reasonable expectation. So I think that's one of the areas. You want to add anything to the cost discussion?
Yeah, I would just say that's certainly one of the heavy lifts, and during our last conversation between the subcommittee and...
Is your light on?
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Thank you. During our last conversation we had last week with ARB staff and the subcommittee, we talked through, some of, we have basically a laundry list of this point of inputs, to the model. And, the heavy lift is going to be what are the assumptions that drive those inputs. And one of the difficult ones to quantify is maintenance cost. We have a pretty good idea as transit members. I can tell you pretty closely what my maintenance cost per mile per, period, that sort of thing, based on my, asset management record keeping. One of the things that we don't know is we haven't run the ZEBs long enough to know, what the long term holds. So we're going to have to make some assumptions. So, ARB suggested the approach of doing sort of an activity-based modeling, meaning, you expect to do a brake job every so often and this sort of repair and batteries at this point. And we'll certainly give that an attempt. It's not an approach that we typically use in the transit industry. We use that for preventive maintenance because that's pretty predictable, but corrective maintenance, it's really a crapshoot as to how long that, traction motor is going to last or that sort of thing. But we'll certainly give it our best go. I think, that we don't have a whole lot of alternatives because there's not a lot of information out. We certainly just yesterday got our first official data report from an electric bus program, which is great. That'll help us tremendously, but that's a very initial, sort of early report, and it, is looking at, in terms of the maintenance costs that we're talking about, it's covering a lot of buses that are under warranty still, so that scenario changes significantly when that warranty drops off. So, we'll certainly give it our best goal. At the end of the day, we don't know what we don't know, but we have to do, the best we possibly can. I think it's important, as transit agencies, we're very risk-averse individuals. We have to be. If you like your job in transit, certainly don't build it if you can't afford to operate it. And that's what we're trying to prevent here. And, so that the policymakers can base their decision-making on the best possible, picture we can paint of what the implications of this regulation could be. This life cycle cost modeling effort is a comprehensive model that'll cover the whole 22 years of the regulation as it's proposed. So at the end of the day, we'll be able to, sort of attach a price tag to this proposal as well as alternatives, hopefully. I think we've come a long way. I know there's folks in the room that will say that potentially we'll save money by switching to ZEBs right now. We don't feel that way. We've done our own research as transit agencies and association, and there is a significant uptick in cost with a transition to ZEBs, whether that be battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell. What's the magnitude of that? We have an idea. Some of the numbers we've come up with, preliminarily are a little bit scary. But I think we've come a long way. Back in May, we got this document that said, buy them today, start saving money tomorrow. ZEBs are cheaper. Now I'm looking at today's document. It says, the cost of ZEBs are on par with conventional technology. So, that's quite a shift. And so now we're starting to speak in the realm of reality, and that's good. And I think this cost modeling effort, and I'm really pleased that ARB staff has embraced that approach and is collaborating, because the end goal is to come up with a life cycle cost model that not only ARB staff believes in, that the transit agencies believe in, and that the OEMs and the manufacturer partners also believe in. And if we can get to that point, I think we've really accomplished something. Sometimes my confidence in that effort ebbs and flows a little bit, but certainly what I'm seeing today, that we've come to par, certainly encourages me. So with that, I'll turn over to Mike. Thanks.
Just to quickly follow up on Steve's report, one of the things that the subcommittee I don't think is really tackled yet that we have to all be aware of is we're starting to develop some good data on the maintenance side. But when you look at transit costs, there's the operational side. And so when we move from one significant technology to another significant technology, the nature of how we provide the service changes completely. And it has operational costs that are not related to the maintenance of the technology, but of the provision of the service itself. And so, just to add to your workload, Steve, we're going to be asking you to tackle that as well, and I think we've got some ways to get there. But we all are going to need to be mindful that when you switch from one technology on the type of bus and the way you fuel the bus and the way you store the fuel and all those things to another, there's these operational issues that unless you're in transit, you wouldn't know. You would have no reason to know. So a manufacturer of a piece of equipment is never going to have to deal with those issues, nor are they ever asked to. So that's another thing I think that subcommittee is going to have to do. And I think, Tony, that brings me back to SB 375. I'm pleased to see that here at the top of this page because I think that's a driver for transit moving forward. And in addition to us being asked to partner with ARB to further the reduction in greenhouse gases, under SB 375, we are being asked to partner with our regional MPOs to be part of a housing transportation plan that makes transit more efficient and makes transit more effective for the users Paul was speaking of earlier. And we have to make sure as we move through this process that those goals are not working at cross purposes upon public transit.
I just would like to basically draw your attention to the fact that 2 studies have been taken up in European Union, in fact, and those results have been made public. After the meeting, I can give you my card and will provide the information. So it would be good actually basically also to explore those studies. And they are basically, those studies have been done with the, combination of major transport agencies like Transportation for London, Hamburg, Goshban, Arbeca, who operate thousands of buses actually, so plus the industry, plus the fuel provider and everybody. And this doesn't include only fuel cells, which I would like to vouch for, but definitely the battery industry, the hybrid industry, and the CNGs. So it will also be good to basically go through those things and see how and where this technology is leading us. Thank you.
And could you introduce yourself for those on the phone?
Ajit Baba from Ballard Power Systems.
Thank you. So, okay, so obviously cost is actually a topic.
If you give me 1 second, Daljit, I'd certainly appreciate if you contributed any of that information that you could share with the subgroup, because certainly, we'd like to consider whatever, the broadest scope of, data out there and information as part of this effort. And we're not questioning, when we say cost in the long run, or costs of this regulation are high, they are. And one of the reasons is this is a transformational regulation. Part of that cost is building out infrastructure and capital costs and workforce development and those things. We may find through this cost modeling effort that, in the long run, when you get to a point of stasis and all those things are done, that, ZEBs, battery electric or fuel cell may be, potentially cheaper operationally. I mean, I could, certainly it's not outside the realm of possibility that we get there. I think this transformational regulation, that happens over 22 years is going to be a very expensive proposition. Particularly as we look at it, in terms of, the aggressive time span. Because if you think about it, if Steve has a brand new fleet right now, all new buses, and by 2040, that's one bus, that's the second replacement cycle. So the next buses I buy have to be, ZEB. So that's a pretty aggressive timeline, and that's part of what's, pushing the cost.
So I guess I'll just make a comment in there is, so obviously cost is central to any discussion, and that's why we want to make sure we have facts. Comment on the discussion paper, I didn't read it anywhere that we said buy them now, they're cheaper now. I think the cost was a big issue that we need to address. It definitely got the discussion going in the right direction. Steve and ARB kind of coordinated on how we're going to model costs. We basically have our own spreadsheet too, and they're essentially the same approach. We are going to look at total cost of ownership. We discussed as part of the transit meeting that some of the things that are going to be more straightforward are what price assumptions we're going to use, what price projections we're going to use that we haven't necessarily defined. That's what actually one of the items we want to discuss today. And then there's going to be some other types of issues that will be much more difficult to address in the dollar number, such as the softer costs. But to the extent that we can account for those, some of the upfront costs, clearly any infrastructure investments, that we have every intention of making sure we cover that as best we can. And then those other softer costs like maintenance, training, and education, other things like that, I think we would like to acknowledge them, but I don't know that we could put a number on it. But again, the idea is to have as robust and as clear as we can be on information. And so I think we're operating under the approach that the zero emission buses either are in some cases already cost competitive or will be in the near future. How we structure a rule, how aggressive we are, will significantly alter how that works out. And until we get some of the cost figures addressed, then we'll be speaking from an estimate based on some numbers, but the more firm we can make it, the better.
I got something to add to that. Ryan Shetterly, CCW. When you're preparing these cost models, I want to make sure, or a question rather, are you going to be providing different charge rates? Are you going to be providing a 50 kW charger versus a 500 kW charger?
Yeah, Brian, it's Steve Miller, Golden Gate. We, in our last conversation, we looked at alternatives in terms of, and what we sort of tentatively arrived at was sort of slow, medium, fast, with slow being, I believe, 100K or less, and medium being 100 to 200 kilowatt, and then anything, or 100 to 300, anything above 300 we would consider fast. So we would break the cost modeling based on those three. The slow being, sort of the plug-in overnight charge, and the medium being the inductive, charge, and the fast charge meaning, overhead catenary type, fast charging. And the model that we're working on will allow for what-if scenario, a scenario analysis, what-ifs, sensitivity analysis to electric rates and things of that nature. We're trying to build the model such that anybody can pick it up and plug in their own assumptions and see what the results are. That's the goal. So it's not going to be a static, sort of, here's the answer. It's going to be, let's play with this and see. Because quite frankly, as this process unfolds, we're going to be learning things. We're going to know more. We'll be able to refine our assumptions and get closer to hitting the target as time goes on. And that, may be soon. That may be years from now. But that's the approach that we're trying to take.
Okay. One thing I might suggest is adding a super slow category and doing a charging system, at 50 kW. I know that will affect your demand charges and what you're paying long term. Some of our systems, do take, between 4 and 6 hours to charge. But even that extra 50 kW an hour would affect demand charges and, long-term cost. So if we could add a fourth category, super slow, that'd be great.
Noted, and that's the reason for the categories is the rate at which you charge a bus really drives the electricity, per kilowatt hour price. I mean, frankly, the demand charges are half the utility bill in most jurisdictions, not all. And Tony, I'll apologize for putting words in your mouth.
That's okay.
I think you said, in May, you said 3-year payback on electric buses.
I don't even remember that one either. So, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. As long as we're on the same page going forward, I think that's what's important. Actually, we will be touching on costs a little more detail, including electricity, kind of on the next part. I just want to maybe close off the summary of the subcommittee. So I just want to touch on we do have the handout. You do have it in front of you. It's online, the transit agency survey. So that's, so we got some feedback from the transit agency subcommittee on that. That is, if those of you who aren't aware, there is a national transit database that all the transits essentially report into that has a lot of details. It's very good for averages and understanding average miles per year and different classes of buses and things of that nature. It's not good for understanding the variation of the differences. So we're putting a survey to potentially to ask a number of questions as to, what some of the barriers that the transits may see, what their actual cost of fuel are, additional information about their purchasing strategies or cycles, and things of that nature, including some information about the distribution of their buses by length and use to a degree, because we think that's an important factor to look at if you're replacing a articulated bus versus a much smaller bus. Costs are going to be different, and we actually want to be able to understand it and be able to actually reflect that. So anybody from this group that wants to look at that survey and have any comments for us, that would be great. I think it's reasonably well fleshed out, and we intend to send it out to a number of transits to start getting feedback on that particular survey in the near future.
Hey, Tony. We'd love to give feedback. Could you post...
Andrew, would you please speak into your
Sure. Could you post the survey on the website in a Word format, so that way we can mark it up?
Oh. Yeah, I guess so. We have it. It's posted in a PDF format. It was sent to the
association sent it out to every transit operator.
Yeah.
Last 2 weeks.
But
ago.
we do have to kind of send it. Post it as a Word document because we modified it a little bit afterwards. So the transit,
the version that's online incorporated a number of the changes that some of the transit.
We sent out a draft right after the Orange County. We got a bunch of comments. It was coordinated by Michael. We sent in those comments. Then I think what's out there now is the second version, is it not?
Correct.
Right.
So
we should send that out in and also post that on the website in the Word document.
Yeah, we can do that. That should be straightforward.
And Tony, this is Michael Pimentel with the California Transit Association. If it's helpful, we can facilitate another round of review, maybe with a fairly reasonable and tight time frame. Another week and a half of just soliciting comments. I think you guys did a great job of incorporating a lot of the feedback that we requested in terms of clarifying some of the questions. But if it's helpful, Andrew, to make sure that we get another round of review in, we can make sure that we get those out to our members.
Yeah, it'd be great. So if, let's see if we can actually post the Word version today, hopefully, but the PDF version is available and you have it in your handout. Yeah, if we can get comments by Friday, I think that of next week, that would be no problem. Yeah, our intent is to send it to a lot of transits, CTA members and not, to solicit feedback. That'll help us understand some of the differences among the different transits, cover some of the details, and one of the items on costs is we have every intention of either doing case studies of individual transits on either a strategy they've already embarked on or a strategy they might pursue, so that we would reflect a real-world situation, even though it may or may not represent the average or a typical. So we do want to understand those differences as part of our overall analysis. Yes.
Just to jump back a little bit, because we went kind of from cost, and I just wanted to briefly comment on the performance-based approach and technology off-ramps and flexibility. The California Transit Association adopted a white paper that we've given to CARB, and it's very high level. But it essentially says that, rather than CARB adopt a regulation that mandates a specific technology, that we advocate for more of a performance-based, one that has goals that says we need to reduce greenhouse gases, and we leave it up to people to try to get there through other advances in technology rather than just one specific one. And so that's part of our challenge also, is to talk about that. We've got experience in that. We went, when CARB said, select the diesel path, the alternative fuel path, we chose the alternative fuel path. We worked with engine manufacturers to reduce NOx. We had NOx level goals. After treatments came on, we did that. We're now with green gas. We've reduced it even further. And, I know Cummins is coming out with a brand new ultra low NOx engine now. So these technology improvements are having positive impacts on this whole air quality and greenhouse gas reductions also. So at least we want to understand those. Also things like green diesel and what impacts those may have. And so by going that way, we feel that that kind of returns CARB to the way it's implemented its mission for a long time, and that is that to performance-based goals rather than specific technology. So I just wanted to comment on what that meant on those, on the agenda here.
Okay, no, that's good. And so again, we are working with the transits to understand how does that translate into what those actions might be, and what those metrics might look like. And I think as we get into the discussion on the cost, I mean, one of the things will be that we've already encountered in terms of concerns about double counting and claiming that we're getting reductions from the bus rule when those reductions are going to occur for other reasons. And so addressing those and making sure that we're not, as a state agency, counting one action as reducing the emissions twice as much as it actually does is actually going to be a pretty significant issue in addressing that. Todd.
Thank you, Tony. Todd Campbell with Clean Energy. Could you expound a little bit on what you specifically mean by double counting? Because, in the electricity sector, you have the renewable energy portfolio, which, I would presume has some, credit being applied to it. In the renewable fuel space, you have the low carbon fuel standard, which I think you're referring to in terms of credit. And so if you can't necessarily count on those reductions being applied to this rule, how would you ever account for those reductions? Because quite frankly, both the power sector and the renewable fuel sector are being incentivized through programs, ultimately to achieve AB 32 goals.
Correct. And so I think the most straightforward example, because I think one of the issues that we discussed with the gas company, I think earlier this month, was will people be able to still even take advantage of the credits associated with the low carbon fuel standard for renewable natural gas if we have a requirement in the bus rule? And so the short answer is, yeah, it'll be unaffected if we have a requirement in the bus rule. However, the availability of the renewable fuel is there because the LCFS program exists. It is offsetting essentially all of the increased costs associated with renewable fuel production. And so as that renewable fuel gets used in motor vehicles and the credits are earned, that action is attributable to the LCFS program. And so we can't, in the transit rule, we think it's still appropriate to require the transits to purchase it to also send a market signal that, yeah, there's a supply angle in terms of the low carbon fuel standard, and that as a broader state policy, we're going to make sure that there's a demand for the renewable fuel from the fleet side. But for purposes of claiming that we're getting reductions in the transit rule, we would not claim GHG reductions associated with that requirement. Because if we did, then we're just counting the same action two different times. And so that's the concern. And I think we had some of a similar discussion on some of the flexibility options that we proposed, some of the items that might be part of a more regional type plan. We discussed with the subgroup that, bicycle sharing, neighborhood electric car sharing, or even other type of car sharing that would potentially get more people onto buses because they have a way to get that last mile more conveniently. That even there's some of that would be incorporated in an SB 375 overall strategy. And so we don't want to, in essence, call an action that is being used to meet that requirement as a way to get additional greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So we have to kind of navigate how do we have something in terms of this overall rule that does achieve real and additional greenhouse gas emissions reduction that's still complementary to the regional approach. So I think there's details to be worked out. We've already met more than once with our staff here who implement the SB 375 program. I think we have a way to move forward that can, because there's a key difference in the way the basic goals are. The SB 375 approach is to ultimately get emissions reductions by getting people essentially out of their cars. I mean, that's kind of the metric, the most straightforward way to look at it. And so that could include expanding bus service, rail, other things to get people out of their car, but it generally doesn't look at what the emissions are associated with that rail or the buses and things like that. And our focus here is on, we'd love people to get increased ridership on transit, but as long as they're going to be using buses, we would rather them use cleaner buses rather than just the conventional buses as part of this effort. And so we think that there's opportunity to increase ridership and get to cleaner buses as a better overall outcome than just doing one or the other. And so we want to make sure that those can work together.
And we got a few comments and questions from the people that are listening to this. Please do speak up and also talk into your microphone directly, and also identify yourself before you start talking about the issues. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I thought we have somebody on the phone. Go ahead.
Well, while we're waiting for someone on the phone, Sharon Cooney with San Diego MTS. Tony, we had this conversation on our subgroup meeting this week with regard to double counting, things like this. But I also wanted to touch base on, so zero emission buses, so we're clear, are not zero emission buses under CARB's standard for tallying up the carbon intensity scores for the various fuels. So even on the CARB website, electricity is significantly higher, has a significantly higher value than does renewable CNG. So are we going to be penalized regionally for switching to electric buses, since they will increase the scores?
Okay, this is Yachun Chao from ARB. So I think we're going to kind of, there are a couple of questions here. One is, what is a zero emission vehicle? How ARB defines it? And the other is, if we look at all types of fuels being used in the market right now, which one is the kind of the one that has the lowest GHG attributes, and those are maybe associated other things. So similar to our light-duty vehicle program, the way we define zero emission vehicle is that if the tailpipe emission is zero, then that is the so-called zero emission vehicle for us. So this is also how we apply to the bus and also trucks programs. And in terms of what kind of fuels that really has a much lower GHG attributes and also other environmental impacts, there are so many pathways that we have to look at. And Sharon, you're right that currently, if you look at, for example, like renewable natural gas generated from, say, a dairy digester that really has very, very low carbon intensity. Some may have like a negative carbon intensity, and so they actually may look like they actually not just look like, they actually could be like a better option. But we also have to think about this when we are presenting the electricity's carbon intensity. It is kind of a today's grid mix. So according to RPS, that is, I think, 18%. Jing, am I right? And but we do have to think about this. If your electricity can be generated by complete renewable resource, such as your renewable natural gas, and combined with a much higher vehicle energy economy ratio, it may actually give us a very different number. Because in LCFS program right now, a natural gas vehicle has a EER ratio at 0.9. If we use diesel vehicle as a baseline 1.0, the battery electric bus actually has a EER for 4.2. If we look at all these factors together, it is going to kind of really make a little bit difference. So the fuel itself is important to look at, but we also have to look at the entire, different combination, including the vehicle technologies. And also, frankly speaking, it is also much easier to control a centralized emission source than having millions or tens of thousands of different mobile sources running out there, because they each have very different deterioration rate. And that is actually not monitored. That is also not kind of regulated in a way. So I agree with you that we do have a lot of very low CI renewable energy pathways, but we also have to look at the other factors as a whole.
So anybody who missed what the EERs are, it's efficiency. So the low carbon fuel standard essentially looks at the carbon intensity associated with the fuels. When you're using it in a vehicle, the energy efficiency ratio for an electric bus, it'll go 4 times as far on the same amount of energy. So you can't ignore that because that's a huge difference. I think the other part, as I said, everything's kind of getting more intertwined and together. The other important part of the question is how much renewable fuels are there? There essentially aren't enough biofuels to supply all sources in the state. And to keep in mind, the bus rule is one fairly small element of an overall state strategy. And so there are industrial stationary sources that we can't envision any other practical way to get emissions reductions for greenhouse gases other than renewable fuels. If we put all renewable fuels that are potentially available into motor vehicles and none to those sources, that is not a good strategy for the state to pursue. If you want to now go more to a microcosm of looking at vehicle strategy, again, we've put this out in multiple policy documents. I think the scoping plan will potentially help actually make this more intuitive than I think I can describe. But when you look at different ways of allocating renewable fuels, I think you essentially come to the conclusion that if you distribute renewable fuels among all sources, you're just not going to meet your goals. If you apply more of it to stationary cooking and other things like that, you can get reductions in those areas. You can apply some of the heavy-duty sector. We're already doing that on the light-duty sector. You can get additional GHG reductions from that you can't otherwise achieve if you don't have renewable fuels. And I think the other part of that picture is there's advantages to a degree for electrification of vehicles for the grid balance. I think that's one of the topics that will be somewhat discussed as part of the symposium. So there are some inherent advantages that you can't quantify. And I think the other issue that I think regularly comes up is, power plant equivalency argument for just even the criteria pollutants or NOx emissions. When we're looking at criteria pollutant emissions, the local effects are really the key there. It's not so much if there's higher NOx emissions in the middle of Iowa, there's really no health impact there. If they're occurring in South Coast, it's only exacerbating a problem that we already have. And so when you look at a power plant, it's like, well, if the power plant is going to be located in the South Coast and you're going to expand it, there's 2 different things. First, it's the the grid in California is getting cleaner because there is a renewable portfolio standard. So again, another policy that's getting more and more renewables for the electricity. So we should be at 50% renewable electricity by 2030. And some of the other sources that aren't necessarily called renewable have no emissions associated with them too. So you can't ignore that. The other part is if you are going to build a natural gas power plant, which is the most likely for any future expansion of electricity service, and you're going to build it in the South Coast, all of those emissions have to be completely offset before that plant can be built. So there will be absolutely no impact in terms of NOx emissions or ozone forming potential associated with an expansion of demand for electricity for that purpose. So all of those factors kind of weigh in. And so again, I think the bottom line, it comes down to what is the overall state strategy? Zero emissions for heavy duty is an important part of it. By no means has the ARB indicated or suggested in any way that we are going to make every truck a zero emission truck in any time frame. And if you look at the mobile source strategy, by the 2030 time frame, we would have a lot of buses already to hopefully transition to zero emissions by that point in time, and maybe up to 30,000 trucks out of a million or so. So it's not a big number, but to even fathom on how we're going to get to 2050, if we don't start along that path, we don't believe it's going to be very plausible or as likely to meet the overall goal. So I think to a degree that people see the bus rule as, hey, we're picking a technology. It's like we're fostering a market, and it's not that different than the policies that are already in place for renewable fuels that I think is creating that market. And it's not that different than the fact that we've contributed to research and certification of the low NOx engines and put the optional standard with the commitment to make sure there was funding associated with it to have the engine manufacturers bring that forward. So we need all of the above. So we don't want, I think that's one of the things that actually might work out, that the next topic will be outreach, is making sure that the message is pretty clear how this fits in, because I know that some of the other folks were concerned that our message was, don't invest in natural gas, don't invest in natural gas vehicles because they're obsolete for trucks and everything, which is not our message at all. But again, when we look at the microcosm of the buses, the distance that they travel, the fact that they're centrally fueled and located, is the best opportunity. And frankly, there's a lot of product right now on the market. And so the market's actually pretty robust for available vehicles. So we're not talking as much of a research kind of demonstration thing that we were talking about 5 years ago anymore. And I think that's a very important factor to weigh into the thinking. So I want to move over. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Todd Campbell with Clean Energy. I wanted to thank you both for that explanation. I think I wanted to elaborate on my colleague from San Diego MTS, because I'm sure your name's not Paul, but just right now. But I think she made a very good point in that I think the jury is out in terms of what's the best option right now for carbon intensity. And I'd like to point out that several of the state's policies, such as like the short-lived climate pollutants, is going to be targeting methane emissions primarily from dairy and other sources, landfills, and maybe even sanitation facilities, are incredibly promising. And I would actually say that California has yet to touch its biomethane capacity. Specifically, most of the biomethane that comes to the state is essentially out of state, because we have yet to fully work out the prohibitions for in-state biomethane production to be maximized. And I think we have come a long way as an industry with the utilities, and I think we'll get there to be able to fully utilize biomethane resources throughout California. I think also, being very intricately familiar with a low carbon fuel standard and understanding the pathways, I don't know many pathways that are biomethane, even if they're out of state, that are not competitive with the electric grid. In fact, I think that they are far more competitive. And I think that was your point, even with the EER ratios. And in fact, I do know that there are plans ultimately for natural gas engines and in the future to actually be built up from the ground up as natural gas engines, not diesel modified engines, which would essentially, as I understand it, eliminate any fuel penalty associated with a natural gas engine. I mean, all this is to say is that, who knows in the future what will be the best option. But at the same time, what we're finding out is the Air Resources Board, for example, is just about to show a pathway from dairy digesters that's negative 247 carbon intensity. And I just don't know anything else that's more competitive than that. So in addition to that, I wanted to let the group know that we are preparing an analysis looking at low NOx strategies with near zero engines using renewable natural gas and looking at what that comparison is in terms of the NOx benefits and other criteria pollutants in comparison with a electric or electrification alternative, let's just say. And I'd state right now that Clean Energy is supportive of all of the above. I think that's where the Air Resources Board needs to be. But I also think that the supply is actually there right now. For example, we've produced, just our company alone, 50 million gallons of biomethane this last year. We're one of multiple players. And so I think that if there's a demand, I would not necessarily say, especially for the transit industry space, that we would not be able to meet that demand.
That's great. So I'll say, so what are you doing on the 8th? I think we might have Todd be a speaker for that one session that we need a speaker in, maybe.
I will be here with bells on.
Okay.
But I also am hoping to bring you a more technical person that actually works with the Clean Energy Renewable Fuels team. Okay. I was hoping to get Harrison Clay, who is our president, but he's going to be traveling that day, but already working on it, and we'd love to accept that invitation.
No, and I think I can echo that the ARB does see an all of the above approach as an overall state strategy, and I think gas company and others are comfortable with that. I think that part of it is, again, where the outreach I think is going to be important, and the messaging is if you look at buses in the context of heavy duty, sure, we're going to get some zero emissions, and frankly, as I said, for buses, it looks like it's going to be pretty practical, and the time horizon we have, it's going to happen. We absolutely support renewable fuel production, especially from the state. We absolutely support low NOx engines. We wouldn't have put a bunch of money to help those come forward. But I think that the key difference is that we think that, and I'm glad, didn't expect there would be a supply problem in the near term, and I don't anticipate one, but I do want to be able to assert that clearly without any question. But the key difference here is we think we need to be making investments now and be planning for the future. And so we see that the buses using the low NOx engines now is going to be helpful and productive to work out any kinks that may show up, might not show up, and to then expand that market in the heavy duty sector more broadly. Long haul trucks, shorter haul, and other things. We still see opportunity for zero emission vehicles for certain types of applications in the near term, and we think that's appropriate. And as you looked at our mobile source strategy, I mean, we think that what is called a low NOx engine today should be the standard nationwide. I mean, so if that's not a pretty clear commitment to having low NOx combustion technology, I don't know what is. It's when we kind of narrow it down to the bus market being fairly unique in terms of the rest of the heavy duty space. That's maybe where we see it just a little bit differently. And I think the way we approach it here doesn't necessarily mean that we're approaching policy for the state that would not be very supportive of low NOx and renewable fuels.
Tony, I don't think we're viewing it differently. I think that we need, and the reason why we're here is to discuss the options of, okay, so how do you evolve, for example, those transit agencies that have invested a significant amount of public funds and have found it fairly significant or successful to run their operations on buses with using natural gas, whether it's CNG or LNG and a future RNG. But also, how can we also maximize those investments by potentially, at one point, when you're moving towards a zero-emission vehicle standard, towards, for example, hydrogen, which could be potentially using that same renewable natural gas that's being produced and create exactly something that actually could be a great bridge for many of these transit agencies to move toward that sector.
No, understood. And then to make sure it's not lost in the discussion, since message is pretty important, low NOx diesel and renewable diesel is clearly part of the overall state approach. So, okay. I'm sorry, but with these.
Okay. Bernie Kotlier with the California LMCC. I think one point that has been missed in this discussion so far is that there are alternative sources for electricity that are 100% renewable. They are on-site distributed generation of photovoltaics and other types of generation. And in combination with storage can provide 100% renewable and consistent source of electricity.
Okay. Appreciate that. Chris.
Hi, Tony. Chris Young with Cummins Pacific. So just a quick question. So if a transit agency either doubles, triples, or quadruples their energy consumption to charge their battery electric buses, there's not going to be an emissions penalty for that agency, or there's no way to really assess that kind of increase of energy consumption.
Well, if they're increasing their electricity consumption, they would be reducing their natural gas or diesel consumption at the same time. So I think ultimately, as part of the final package we prepare for the board, clearly we'll be addressing what the emissions impact are. And so we will see that, I think you'll see that the approach we're taking is going to be a net positive on emissions any way you look at it. So again, and as I mentioned, that I think the one thing we're still struggling with is how do you show the net impact of all of the policies the state has together that show the emissions reductions versus the ones we attribute to the bus rule because of the double counting concern and things like that. So we'll, as much as possible, try to make that as clear as we can.
But of course, you're assuming that the electric generation isn't coming from natural gas.
Well, I think
That's fine. I mean, or you may be displacing renewable natural gas.
Okay, I think that's again where the scoping plan, I think, will identify here are some what are plausible scenarios for the future, because there's a lot of uncertainty with the future. I mean, there's no question about that, and there are other factors like, you can essentially make fuel from any energy source, and as you mentioned, you can take natural gas and make hydrogen. You can make electricity with it. You can take renewable natural gas and make both of those, and so then ultimately it's what's reasonably likely? Do we have enough of the biofuels to do it? If we're going to have excess renewable energy, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to do management systems to make sure it gets into vehicles that based on time of use or have pricing signals for that? Are we going to store it in battery systems? Are we going to store it as fuel? Or are we going to convert it to gas? I mean, those are all aspects that I think get reflected to a degree in the scoping plan that kind of does outline as a overall state strategy, not just motor vehicles. How do fuels get allocated? How do different policies shape different outcomes? Yeah, Henry.
Henry Hoga with South Coast AKMD. Tony, I just want to reiterate what you said earlier, that really the focus is in getting the cleanest technology out there and the right time frame. And for the South Coast, as many of you know, we need the NOx reductions. And so it doesn't matter if it comes from low NOx engines at 0.02 gram with the Cummins Westport engine or zero emission. We prefer zero because we know that if there are problems with combustion, then we wouldn't have increases in NOx emissions if the engine is not maintained. But obviously, our preference is to go to the cleanest as best we can in the vocations where it makes the most sense. So we do want to reiterate that. And understandably, the discussion on fuels is important in the greenhouse gas realm to make sure we don't double count. But we definitely would want to push forward with the cleanest technologies. So I want to bring us back to the technology itself. Thanks.
Okay. So let me just make a quick shift. I'm actually not even sure where we're supposed to be on time, but let's just shift to outreach briefly. Because I want to kind of maybe just discuss what are the items that maybe we want to focus on for the future. So Danielle Chambers is here from our outreach group. That group is instrumental in making sure that fleet owners and other interested parties that are affected by rules that ARB does have in place, that they know what the requirements are, what they need to do, and things like that. And that includes, information that we provide online. One of the things that I think we learn is when we do meet with different individual transit fleets, in some cases there's a lack of information or a lack of understanding what technologies are out there, even as sometimes it's not real clear what available funding there is and how to take advantage of it. And then we do know that some of the transit fleets are interested in very much in providing, lack of a better term, centers of excellence where they could provide training and other materials and information for mechanics and others for any essentially advanced technology. And so I'd kind of like to tee up, are there specific, so one homework assignment from my viewpoint is for us to, I think, put out just basic information how the transit fleet rule fits in within the overall state plan. So that the questions that were being asked about, this isn't a strategy you can apply to trucks, and how it fits in. I think even how zero emissions fits into the overall renewable aspect of it. But are there, when we've been at different meetings, the issues come up of, look, I want to spec a bus. These are newer buses. I can't spec them. And so I can't really bid because I'm not familiar with it. And this is typically from the smaller transits. And so I think the response was, that some of the larger transits have stuff that they could share so they can help. I think APTA has been putting out some more recent information that's updated to reflect newer technology buses. But is that a topic that we can help facilitate or be a central point to make sure that a transit who might be interested in investigating that or looking at that they would know that, hey, since ARB is working on a transit rule, this is something that people could understand what their options are and how to potentially pursue them or investigate them, rather than having to know the number of the specific transit that might give them some information. Is there any interest there?
Steve Miller from Golden Gate Transit. I'll address that just in the there are multiple NGOs out there that specialize in that, the CalSTART Center for Transportation and the Environment, and others that really do a good job of stewarding a smaller agency along the path to advanced technology. So I'm not sure that that's an area that the state needs to really step too deeply into. At the same time, transit agents, the transit industry isn't a competitive industry, so we certainly, as you said, folks like VTA pick up the phone and we'll share specifications, lessons learned, that sort of thing. I'm not sure that it's something that the state would really be successful at. Now, having said that, there's has been discussion in the past of if there's going to be some sort of a transit ZEB rule, maybe there should be a state, much like we buy a lot of things off of state commodity contracts and that sort of thing. Maybe there's some opportunity for the state to do a consortium contract for the advanced technology buses, and have a menu choice of an electric, hydrogen, that sort of thing. That's been discussed. I don't know whether that's an idea that would ever gain traction or not, but that's another avenue to accomplish, I think, sort of a similar goal.
Just to be kind of clear, so that concept, as far as I understand, some of the smaller transits in general will, in essence, put out an RFP that specs out a range of buses that they can all buy from collectively. Is that the concept?
Well, Tony, let me touch sort of on that smaller operator issue. A couple of things. One is CalAct has now reached out to folks like CTE, and they're going to be very involved in our spring conference in La Jolla, where we're going to urge the smaller systems that in many cases aren't really aware that these discussions are really going on at this level. They're sort of aware that there might be a new rule, and we hope to find out about it at the right time. And I think that's going to be very effective. I think, one of the things you see with these smaller rural systems is anything on the Sacramento, you got to build a lot of trust. And then that's not to cast aspersions on anybody in this room. It's just the further you get from Sacramento and you're small, the more it's like, uh-oh. That's just sort of the first thing to be aware of. Secondly, on this procurement issue, CalAct does now run a joint procurement.
Okay.
And we are now having discussions internally about how we bring in other kinds of vehicles in addition to the diesel and the CNG. So those discussions are underway, and I would hope that we could be, as CalAct, be talking to you folks as that moves forward. Now that brings me to another issue that is really going to be difficult for us to all overcome in this process, and that is as much as we see the Federal Transit Administration in one section embrace these technologies, we see the rest of the FTA continue to move in the opposite direction almost in the way we procure. So joint procurements are becoming harder to get past the FTA. The cost analysis we have to do for why we choose one bus over another is getting harder with the FTA. And these things need to be recognized because we fund our buses by and large through federal funds. And while there's all these boutique programs out there that have different sets of rules, the bulk of the funding comes through the 5307 program. And those rules are still as rigid as they were 20 years ago. And when you get to the small operator level, it becomes even more challenging. So there's opportunities there, but there's also a need to recognize how difficult this is going to be in terms of those kinds of procurements, those joint procurements. So
is there any other information or other things that the ARB can make sure we either make available or maybe have a better way, more eloquent way to describe it, I guess, maybe I did verbally, that we can make sure we can have available when there are questions or when others have questions, not necessarily people in this room, but others kind of look at, hey, I'm not going to invest in, I'm a truck owner, I'm not going to invest in natural gas because ARB is going to phase them all out. There's, misinformation, things like that. I want to make sure that we can touch on anything like that. So and if you don't have an immediate comment or thought and you think of something later, by all means, just email us and let us know. But we are open to discussing that.
Just to clarify, since you're talking about outreaching and facilitating people to implement the rule, are we getting the cart in front of the horse here? Because was pretty sure I was told that this is not a done deal.
No, it's not. To me, when I'm looking at, I mean, I guess when you use the term outreach, it could be pretty broad. One, I think there's been some confusion as to what we've actually been doing, and I think that's one of the reasons we have this group is to kind of make it more clear, and to provide more information so that people who aren't actually participating in this process can still get up to speed on it or be aware of it. As I mentioned, again, we met with, with CTA annual conference, the CalAct one, the different regional meetings locally and different individual transits, but no one person was in all of those meetings, and so it's not clear that the ARB is actually taking a little longer to work out and understand those details is why we didn't do a workshop before now. And so when I'm referring to outreach here, it's more of, I think part of it is to the extent that what ARB is approaching in terms of the goal of the bus rule is being somewhat intersected with ARB's overall goals and policies for other sectors in heavy duty, that if that is an area of confusion, obviously we want to make sure that's clear. And then to a degree, it's clearly we have a number of incentive programs and a number of entities also run them. If we see it as a positive for those who do want to step forward right now and take advantage of those programs, that the more people are aware of it and can take advantage of it, that's going to be overall a positive. And then I think with any kind of future rule, there will be a post-rule education kind of effort on what the requirements are, what your options are, things like that. We're still in the process here of trying to identify, again, we established a framework or an approach. I think we're having the right kinds of discussions. And it's like, how do we find that path to move forward that makes sense or makes the most sense?
Just a matter of housekeeping. I was just told by people in San Diego that the webinar is not working,
Uh-oh.
audio or video.
Is there a way to?
Could be the Flash player, but I checked with the technical person right now.
So I guess I'll ask if anybody else is participating by webcast. Can you just email us to confirm that it's actually working?
I just got an email saying that the audio is very spotty because some people aren't remembering to come up to the microphone, and so he's only getting 40% of the audio.
Okay. All right. So we'll make sure that we speak more clearly into the microphone.
Tony, in terms of back to the issue public outreach, certainly within the California Transit Association, we are communicating extensively to all of our members the process, the issues that we're involved in, the status, that's occurring extensively. And so you can easily work through us for all of our members, and we'll be very helpful and cooperative in making sure that we continue that. And then Rick also mentioned the smaller operators and CalAct, and that's another tremendous opportunity. Those that are not members of CTA, most all of them are members of CalAct as well. So I think through those two organizations, you're going to reach probably 98% of the transit operators in the state. So partnering with the two of us is tremendous.
Okay. No, and that's important and definitely a key for the rulemaking itself. But there clearly are a lot of other interested parties and stakeholders that are interested in what we're doing here that are beyond just the individual transits. And I want to make sure that we don't get wrong interpretations of information or our approach here and applying it differently. And frankly, even where we are in progress and things like that. Okay. So Danielle, is there anything else we want to touch on for outreach? We could just move on to the next topic.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
Steve Miller from Golden Gate Transit. One thing to keep in mind is that, for the first, let me do the arithmetic, 13 years of the fleet rule, the ZEB requirement only applied to transit agencies with fleets of 200 or larger. So the smaller fleets really didn't, once they, reached their fleet rule compliance, they considered themselves sort of done and didn't have to pay attention. And that, changed at, I think, in December of 2013. So I would caution that even if we are reaching those agencies, they may not have the staff or the wherewithal to deal with, most small agencies are just trying to get through today and tomorrow, much less worrying about this rule that may happen in 2 or 3 years. So I would caution that we need to be cognizant of the fact that the small agencies, may need to be treated maybe a little bit differently than the large agencies who have been devoting time and attention to this for quite some time and have plans and sort of contingency plans in place should a rule hit them.
No, and we absolutely understand. I think even when we did the workshop in May, it's like we recognize that smaller transits would have a different situation than this, again, where looking at costs and options and things is going to be very important, because I think that'll help play out. And we fully understand that, if you're making an investment in a certain amount of infrastructure and you have a minimum number or a minimal number of vehicles that is matching that investment, then it's not going to make a good economic decision. I will say, and frankly, let's see if I solicit any new comments, it's that when we have spoken to a lot of the small operators, the impression that, frankly, I've gathered from meeting with them is they're interested in learning more. I think a number of them are actually looking at how they can incorporate some advanced technology vehicles into their fleets, including the ones that only have 5 total. You guys do know that Porterville has got the first 2 buses are just about to. I don't know how many buses they have, but they're pretty small. And you guys also probably already know that Antelope Valley has about 70 or 80 buses and 75, and they're going to be 100% in 2 years before we actually start the requirements. And previously, the existing rule was 200 buses or larger were the only ones affected. So having a transit fleet that maybe only owns 2 buses meet the same requirement probably doesn't make sense. But if they have 50 or more, it could make sense. And we're trying to learn a little bit more about that. And frankly, how they can take advantage of funding. And again, to the extent that we can help them, just not a bad thing to take advantage of this now. Okay, so now...
Tony, just really quick on that last point. There are a few of the small operators that are probably better prepared to go wherever they need to go than others. But then there are others that are just as far away as they possibly can be. And it's a lot of it, in my observation, is staff driven. So, in Antelope, you've got a staff that is ready to go and embraces this, and they have a lot of talent there at that particular agency. You go up to Ukiah, and you got a guy who's in charge of transit who reports to the public works director, who reports to the city manager, who has a city council that you might expect to see in Ukiah. And they are so ill prepared to move in any direction that, they're going to have tremendous challenges wherever the rule goes. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that I think, both CALACT and CTA are saying as part of their strategy back to you is we need flexibility and not a one-size-fits-all approach.
No, understood. Okay, and understanding those differences and where it makes sense to say, here's where we draw a line in a fairly straightforward way is one of the things we'll be looking at how to do.
And just for the folks that are watching webcasts, sometimes you have to refresh your browser. And if it's down, just to refresh it one more time, and then it should come back up. Thanks.
Okay, so now, let's see. We got 90 minutes. Do we have? Yeah, we're doing okay, I guess. Okay. Yeah, so now the cost of ownership. So as we kind of touched on, we actually spent more time on it with the transit fleets on the approach and methodology. I think we're in sync. We actually had been sharing our spreadsheets and models for over a year now with Steve. And so the basic approach that we're taking is to determine what the amount of money, frankly, a transit would be spending with normal replacements and purchases, including operating and maintenance costs for whatever their current fuel source is, and then that anything that we would do in the rule that would be required and would change that we would model the costs from year to year associated with that. The period will be the life of the rule, and frankly, I think we'll go out to 2050 as the way we're going to model it to the extent that you buy a bus in a given year, we want to reflect its full useful life. It's part of the way we look at it. So that is how we're going to look at what the cost differences are and to understand where, which year those costs will occur, and are there any spikes and valleys and different things like that. And so instrumental to that, as we kind of already touched on, is getting better information or a consensus approach, frankly, on how we address maintenance, fuel savings, I think the electricity costs, as you mentioned, depending on your strategy, your electricity costs are going to be different, even if you're on the same rate. We do, and so one of the things we're trying to keep tabs on is, frankly, what the electric rate policies are in the state. So as far as Foothill, as the example from our meeting last time, is they were operating under a waiver to have a rate that didn't have demand charges. Southern California Edison has an EV4 rate that is applicable to you. That does not have demand charges, so it is based on the amount of electricity that you use. And so for Foothill, that would be the best representation. For somebody who's in LADWP, electricity rates there tend to be pretty good on standard rates. They probably are favorable compared to even the Edison EV rate. And if that's the most applicable rate, that's what we would want to do. And that's why looking at, and San Diego tends to have the highest cost of electricity in the state in general. And assuming that they do have to work with a standard rate with demand charges, then depending on the strategy they employ, will significantly impact their cost of electricity for a battery electric bus. And so we have a handout. It's more of a discussion document that isn't, it's more to kind of see the discussion, and I think might be helpful in, I think, guiding. So we're not looking for, style and other things, but we just wanted to cover in the first paragraph that that's essentially what we're doing. We're looking at a 14-year bus replacement cycle. That's pretty representative. You have to keep them a minimum of 12 years with FTA funding, but clearly most transits keep them longer. And when we say that, what we're trying to do when we look at costs is do two different things. One is, what's a good representation of something that's fairly typical, and probably for purposes of future discussion would be, here's some reasonable ranges that would bound the situation. And then for purposes of what we want to do in terms of a rule analysis is actually get to the individual fleet level. And if there's different rates, different strategies, different requirements, frankly, in different parts of the state or different fleet sizes, we would actually want to be able to model that to put together a statewide number. So we're not looking to just use an average for a statewide number if we can get the details. And that's in part what we're hoping that the survey will help us fill in some of those. So paragraph 2 kind of talks about the renewable fuels, and we kind of touched on, I think, some of these topics already. But so the first question that we had been asked, or not part of this meeting, but before, was, people with any rule requirement that requires the use of renewable fuels, people will still be able to take advantage of the credits. They won't be the same as if we didn't put it in the bus rule. And then we did touch on here, it's like, because of the double counting issue, if you're taking the credits, you can't attribute that to the rule requirement as achieving more GHG reductions, because that's already accounted for in terms of the LCFS program. So that's you don't have to take notes on that. For natural gas engines, Cummins has certified one of the engines, the 8.9 liter, to 90% lower than the existing standards, and that will be commercially available by the end of this year. The question, I guess.
Roughly April of this year, so April 2016.
Okay, even earlier. Okay, great. Are you guys able to or willing to share what the incremental costs might look like to a transit fleet in the bus? Because we have a hardware cost estimate that's really low, but we know that you're not. I think our estimates look at what it would be for a national standard, for instance, at high volume. For a standard off the line kind of thing, and there's other inherent risks associated with that.
There's two methods to acquire the low NOx engine. One is through a new bus procurement, and that's more the bus OEM's ability to quote that.
Okay.
But for a midlife rehabilitation, it would roughly be about a $15,000 increment above the ISLG, the current ISLG.
So that would be the engine cost itself, or is that incorporated in the bus too, both? Well, I mean, if I'm buying a new bus, I could just expect roughly.
Can't really roughly, or
Okay.
it's hard for me to really say how the new bus OEM will integrate it.
Okay.
But
So-
for like, taking the ISLG out, put in a near zero wind, it's about a $15,000 incremental.
And for my benefit, since I'm not the engine guy, I'm going to presume the block and dropping in the engine in place of an existing ISLG would be pretty much a no-brainer.
The engine, yes. The catalyst is a little bit larger. It's maybe an inch wider and half an inch taller.
Okay.
So some of the compartments for that in a bus, is a little bit tight.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with engine space in some buses.
Tony?
Yes.
David Warren from New Flyer. So we do have some information that we can share, perhaps not at this meeting, regarding the ISLG near zero engine.
Okay.
We're currently engineering it in the bus right now, and
okay.
When it's appropriate, we'll share that with Carbon.
Okay, appreciate that.
Tony, I had a couple questions for Chris. In terms of that 15,000 for the midlife rehab, how is that split between the advanced after treatment and the improvements to the engine? How much?
It's all one certified package, so we don't split out engine versus catalyst.
And sort of what I'm driving at is what's sort of the long-term outlook for that advanced after treatment? Is that a maintenance item, or is that something that drops in like a three-way catalyst?
It is a three-way catalyst. It's the existing ISX 12G catalyst, so it's been in operation since that engine. So it's a maintenance-free catalyst.
Thank you.
And I guess while we're on maintenance and other topics, we could presume that maintenance costs and operational costs would be pretty much the same as a conventional engine that it's replacing.
There's one small new filter for the near zero, which is the closed crankcase filter, but it's pretty nominal in terms of what that would be.
Yeah, it's within the noise of what we're talking about, I think, in most cases. Okay. So anything else we want to touch on the engine in particular? Just frankly, for my benefit, so that engine's available. Is it essentially most or all 40-foot buses are pretty much using that engine, or do some of them need a bigger engine that isn't available yet? So I'm really just asking for purposes of looking at any future costs that we would, look at, presuming that engine's available, widely available. We're in essence proposing that a low-NOx engine be purchased if it's available for the bus model. Is it appropriate to assume that a low-NOx engine will be available for most buses, for most transits going forward?
Yes.
Okay,
all
good enough.
OEMs are going to be offering this engine. It's the same ratings as the current ISLG, so for a 40-foot versus 60-foot, I mean, it's the same rating engine.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Tony, if many of the transits actually access funding locally from our programs, and so we've done a lot of repowers from the first generation natural gas engine to the newer generation. So when the regulation is in place and you're requiring the purchase of cleaners, I want to get your thought on how transit agencies then can still perhaps access local funding. Obviously, the FTA funding will still be there, but we do believe in incentivizing to convert to the lower engines to help out with
For the South Coast in particular, if we basically stay with the initial framework for that we propose, we would say, if you're replacing the bus, make sure you order the low-NOx engine that comes with it, and we don't touch repowers or rebuilds. And you say you want to incentivize the rebuild because it's not required by the rule, that should make it really straightforward, correct?
Is it then for purchases of new buses? Then?
Yeah, I mean, that's where we were starting. We weren't sure if it would be practical to say, when you're doing rebuilds, incorporate them, because we weren't absolutely sure if there would be a form and fit issue, whether the block would be identical or similar, things of that nature. As far as funding, I think that makes it much clearer. And otherwise, typically with most funding programs to get NOx reductions, it's a particular project or engine replacement of this example could be funded as long as it's before what the rule would require, a number of years usually. So for example, truck replacements. It's, hey, if you want to step forward or replace a truck, will give you funding to replace it as long as it's ahead of what the rule requires. If it's when the rule required it, then it's not surplus anymore. It's not extra. So it's the same kind of concept. So that might work for South Coast. Obviously, South Coast is one of the biggest air quality problems we're trying to solve. So that might be a mechanism to address it and to get additional NOx reductions when at time of rebuild in existing buses.
I think between the 5 major transit agencies, we have the largest number of buses also.
Okay, well, just to be as direct as possible, so would you be advocating that we do require a low NOx engine to be put in the rebuild or not?
Well, we have our local fleet rule in place and for 15 years now, and we're looking at that and seeing how it can be complementary to your rule.
Yeah, I say now, obviously, to the extent that we're not talking about funding specifically, but obviously when we're looking at the rule and the construct of it, we would want to be cognizant of how it might impact local funding sources in addition to state funds to make sure that we don't create an unintended consequence there either.
I had one last question on the low NOx engines before we move on, and this is directed at Chris. In terms of the CNG engines, to make the 2007 NOx requirements, a switch was made to stoichiometric combustion that resulted in a lot of sort of unintended consequences in terms of failures and maintenance issues. Do you anticipate any of that with this engine? I'm not familiar with it at all. Is it a transformational change in the way the EGR or the in-cylinder control strategy works, or can you please just spend a moment or two on that?
Yeah, the engine has been improved over, since 2007. The technology improves every year. The biggest change is the catalyst, and that's, it's a non-moving part. It's very stable and it works very well. So I think the improvements that we've seen with the ISLG are all incorporated into the near zero engine. So I don't anticipate anything happening with the near zero engine that we haven't seen with the ISLG. But in fact, we've improved the ISLG over, since 2007.
Tony, David Warren from New Flyer again. Just on the retrofits, just want to point out, as Chris mentioned, the after-treatment system is different. The three-way catalyst, it is larger. Mm-hmm. It's not potentially impossible to do retrofits, but it's not exactly a plug-and-play, and it's going to require some engineering.
Right. No, understood. And again, right now I don't foresee, I guess, all options on the table of saying that we would require as a state policy for an engine rebuild or replacement to be with a low NOx engine. But even if we did, I think that's a fairly straightforward one to say, hey, if it doesn't fit in the existing engine without significant modification, it wouldn't be required either. And then it's just the basic mechanics on how you make that distinction. But again, I think for a variety of reasons, we might be better off not touching the engine rebuilds in terms of the state rule, because the local requirements kind of already potentially address that.
One quick thing I want to add to that. I maybe would suggest that you guys don't require it as a state rule, but for some of your fleet operators that are looking to go with that particular engine, do make it feasible for them to go with a rebuild kit or a retrofit option. Some of these fleet owners might have relatively later model buses or later model trucks, but can't necessarily go out and afford to buy and replace everything with a brand new build, but they still want to be aggressive in helping you guys reach your goals as far as emissions.
No, and to make sure, I guess it's clear, so far anything that we've proposed in our framework would not require anybody to replace anything ahead of their normal schedule. It's what they would buy that we would be influencing. And so, at least right now, because one of the things I've been struggling with is trying to understand what a performance-based approach could look like. And so, putting in low NOx engines during rebuild could be one of those things you could say, hey, I'll do that because I'll get more reductions than we would otherwise require for NOx emissions anyway. And that could be a positive that is at least helps me define at least with the types of actions we're looking to see how a construct could work for meeting a performance-based approach.
Well, and I think a lot of it is in the measurement of that, you know, and we have talked very preliminarily about establishing baselines and where we are now across the state. Because, you know, as I mentioned before, we are not a one-size-fits-all in this industry. We've got small operators, we've got large operators, we've got operators with diesel, we've got operators with CNG, we've got operators that run small buses with gasoline. So, you know, this one-size-fits-all is difficult. So what we had talked about is establishing what is our baseline now? Where are we in terms of greenhouse gases, okay? And then where do we want to go from here? And because, you know, to some people, and I'm not advocating this, I'm just saying it as an example. If you're a diesel, you know, just a diesel user and you're not exploring anything else, to start going to CNG and burning green gas, maybe you have a big impact, okay? So there's all kinds of things that can be done short of just telling everybody you have to start buying zero-emission buses, electric buses, or battery buses. And I think that's the kind of thing that we at least want to talk about. We want to talk about green diesel. We don't have much technical information on that yet either. But I think as there has been in this battle over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of things that our industry and manufacturers and innovators have brought to the table to help us improve air quality substantially. You know, I was in this business in the 80s when we had belching smoke and all that stuff, and where we are today in terms of particulate, where we are today in terms of NOx, everything. We are exponentially better now.
No, and I think we
break the bank to get there.
Right. No, and we look at that success, frankly. I mean, we acknowledge it, and we look at frankly, the transits. I think we're a significant part of making that happen and making it happen sooner. And so we're coming back to you again. It's like, come on, you guys, let's be first. So, because we got some major state goals to meet, and we're doing it relatively early. And I think that's the discomfort level. It's like we're doing it now because we think it's appropriate to start making those investments so that we have a lot of options 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
And we don't disagree. You know, I think it's a matter of how we proceed, and in what ways
please use the microphone.
What ways we proceed to, you know, what's going to have the biggest impact on developing this technology and making it, you know, what was that, the Pasadena study that just got done to getting it to level 8 or level whatever it was, so that it is truly commercial. You know, how do we do it? All the tests, we have a relatively small number of vehicles out there. All the tests have been with relatively small fleets, and we have a lot of diversity in this state in terms of operations. And that's what we have to think about.
Okay. I was just going to say to Paul's point, I mean, in a lot of ways, ARB must, and AQMD should take a lot of credit for really moving and innovating this industry. I mean, if you look at the 0.02 gram standard, it would take, you could put 540 of those buses, and that would equal one 1985 bus. And that's pretty impressive.
Yep. And I wanted to comment on that point too. I'm glad you made the statement you did, Tony, that, you know, we, transit sort of spearheaded the innovation in the heavy duty, you know, low NOx, low PM engines. And now you're coming back to us again because of that, you know, perceived success. Because I think we need to keep, you know, frame this debate such that, you know, cleaning up 10,000 buses in the state is not going to do anything significant towards achieving climate change goals or NOx attainment. This is about technology incubation, and quite frankly, you know, we're the right people to do it. What our concerns, and you've heard them here and you've heard them, you know, repeatedly, is that we need to be able to do that in such a way that we keep our systems intact and able to continue serving the folks that depend on us daily. And that's why, you know, we're here, and that's why we're, you know, so vociferous that we want because we do have a primary mission, and Paul and Rick have stated it. It's moving people, not technology incubation.
Right. No, and again, so I agree with all of that. I mean, that is clearly our goal to actually, frankly, improve transit service to the extent we can. And the only part I don't fully agree with is, yes, the transit bus category is a very small category, but I think what you would be doing here, it would be significant nonetheless.
One quick point of clarification. The low NOx standard is 0.02, but the near zero engine certified to 0.01. So it's one bus for over 1,000 buses.
Well, that gets a whole little more complicated. You got to factor in deterioration, malmaintenance, other factors. So, and I can, just for those who don't know, I mean, when most engine manufacturers certify an engine, they have to certify below the standard so they can guarantee it will still meet that standard after several years or 100,000 miles, or depending, or 400,000 miles for a bus. So just because it starts clean doesn't mean it stays clean forever.
Yeah,
Well,
and
not
we
to-
have a comments from.
Not to belabor the point, though, in the ARB's 2012 vision document, there was a chart that came from the South Coast AQMD that showed the NOx sources, and I think like taxi cabs made it on there, but buses, transit buses didn't. They weren't even a blip on that radar screen. So, just to put some perspective on what we're dealing with.
Okay, so I have a comment back there.
Jimmy O'Day from Union of Concerned Scientists. Just to echo what Tony just said, the greenhouse gas emissions and NOx, whatever emissions from the transit sector is small as a fraction of California, but the health impacts for people that ride the buses, that live on the bus routes, is a very significant local impact that definitely, transit agencies and we all have a very important role to play in improving the health of people's lives that are directly affected by these living on these routes and whatnot. And there's a lot of science to back that up. I'm sure we all know just standing on a bus stop, you don't want to stand there your whole life.
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly respond to that. Your point's well taken, but I think that this industry is actually really clean already. I mean, they've invested a tremendous amount to innovate themselves. That doesn't mean they should stop. But I don't think we're like in 1985 anymore at the same time.
So now let's move on to a little more controversial topic. And make sure we get to the meat of this, because I actually want to draw some stuff out of the group that maybe we haven't fully drawn out. So we have here an example of how a zero-emission battery bus could pretty much be equal in terms of cost to a conventional. These are realistic numbers. These are actually from representative, but they don't cover everything. And so we want to talk about the covering everything, including, I think, what's the next part of the description. So again, it is simply an example. It is battery electric only. Fuel cells, I think it requires another discussion that I don't know that we're going to have time to discuss today. But to me, what I actually want to move forward to is, clearly we're working with the transits to get the best baseline number for individual transits, as well as a good representation, maintenance, and other things. And we're going to update our analysis probably multiple times between now and the next several months. As information gets better, we'll use it. If we're meeting with an individual transit who has their information that we could look at, we would plug those into the model and say, this is what we see. And ultimately, when we craft a specific proposal to a specific timeline, then we can look at what those costs would mean and what we think they would mean over time. And to me, frankly, having those costs will actually help us establish what we think is a proposal that makes sense. So, but ultimately, you got to try something, see how it looks like, try something else, see what the impacts are, and see how you go from there. So one of the topics that that I think is maybe partly outside of the transit focus part on getting cost information is, what are we going to do for, frankly, just bus prices today and in the future? Battery electric bus prices have been coming down pretty fast, and frankly, fuel cell ones have too. And we have a letter from New Flyer on the fuel cell ones that, well, if you actually bought 40 of them, then the price could be a pretty substantial difference from what it would be if you bought 10. So we see both battery costs coming down, like you see in light duty, and for fuel cell stacks, I think those costs are coming down. And there's other things happening in other parts of the world where there are now hundreds potentially being sold. Europe and China in particular, maybe even up to the thousands. That could have some significant cost implications in the relatively near future. They are being deployed in buses. And so we kind of want to be able to have a reasonable estimate or projection as to how do we factor in battery cost price reductions in trends and what are our sources for that, or better, and then how do we factor in any types of, lack of a better term, production volumes or predictable volumes of a higher number of buses, because unlike cars, we don't need to talk in the numbers of thousands for to see production cost savings. I think just having steady orders and things like that will actually influence the price. Is there a way that we can reflect that, use either existing, whether there's existing data, existing studies, other projections, to kind of make a reasonable estimate? Because I do think I think what we tried to say, I don't know if we said it very eloquently, or I'll just say it now, it's the battery bus price today is probably going to be lower in the future with the same battery size. But if you're increasing battery size as part of that, and it's not a good way to represent, but to then expect that it'll serve more and more routes or more and more needs, we want to be able to kind of make sure it's pretty clear what we're looking at. Because if we say this, if you start in 2018 with a very modest number, and then we ratchet up significantly in 2025, the cost implications of doing that are much different than ratcheting up a lot right now, with these types of things. So we're looking to, frankly, anybody that can identify either a source of information, including the manufacturers, who I've seen in different presentations, other things that do have some projections as to what they anticipate sales may be, and how that might ultimately influence price. Something that we could use publicly. Clearly, I think everybody knows that if you buy one bus, you probably pay a lot more than if you're buying 20, 30, or 100, just because of the volume purchase kind of thing. We want to understand, again, what a good approach is to be consistent with the way transits have normally been buying buses, so those who are upgrading to zero emission ones in this particular case, it would be done in the timing that's consistent with what they've been doing, but also that depending on when they would make making the purchase, that the assumptions should be different. So I'll just stop there. Anybody have comment?
Of course, I should be talking bus prices, but just Aljit Baba from Ballard again. Just to give you, I just want to give you a flavor, not from North America, basically from Europe. Last week, actually, January 29th, a solicitation has come out from European Union for 100 fuel cell buses. And the bus price is capped at 650,000 euros per bus. At today's exchange rate, that's about $700,000. So nothing to talk about against this thing. So, but just to give you an example, that within 10 years, this technology, which was at $3.2 million per bus at AC Transit, is down to 650,000 euros per bus in volumes of just 100. And that's the direction the industry, and the report which actually Nico has just forwarded to you, by 2020, let's say if the volumes are between 300 to 500, the price would be under 400,000 euros. But that's what is happening in Europe. And we think that the much better pricing will come out of China, actually, where, we are shipping large number of fuel cell modules and the buses are being built. And I'm sure with the time, actually, North America will also have the similar thing. So the industry basically is providing the, trends in the right direction on this.
Okay. So how do we translate that to California in particular, or U.S. in general? So we'll be contacting you and see what we can, one, describe that, make sure we describe that accurately, and then to use that to kind of inform what we think the future might look like here.
I would caution, as we try and draw parallels or gather information from, bus sales across the pond. They make very good buses, but they don't have the FTA 12-year requirement in most places in Europe, and there's a lot of things on a bus that's much different. So I would caution there. In terms of trying to project, what the future looks like in terms of bus prices, a bus is a bus is a bus. It's a mature technology. So the glider's not, there's no, significant change there. That's out there in volume. A traction motor, that's mature technology. That's out there in volume. You're not going to see any significant, decline in price due to volume. It's really about batteries and potentially fuel cells. I think, we should be looking at fuel cell stacks for potential, decreases with volume, and batteries potentially. But I'd also caution there that the wow factor is going to play into that, because there's always going to be a new Mobetta. It's not going to be the same bus we're buying today. In 10 years, it's going to be the better bus, or the better battery, or the better that. I'll draw an analogy to this thing. This is still $600, even though these things have been around a long time, right? They didn't go down. Matter of fact, they've
Steve's holding up his phone.
Yeah. So just a couple of points that, things we need to be cognizant of and careful of. And in terms of the industry that I work in, we have to, we don't like uncertainty. So we tend to base our analysis on what we do know, and try not to conjecture on, what we think might happen. So I would just caution that we be really careful and conservative in that approach as we go on.
Daljit Baba again, just one small point is that those buses basically have to be between 12 to 15 years of lifetime. That's insisted by the transit agencies.
This is Yachun Chao from ARB. I think what Steve mentioned about the 12 years FTA requirement is very important. But let's also not forget about that in Europe, a lot of transit agencies, they are not subsidized by government at all. So they basically have to come up with their own fare, and also there are other things. So I just want to also kind of factor this in. And I know that.
Yeah, I just wanted to, and this is, from some data developed by EPRI, not just by Proterra, but the cost of batteries is going down. I mean, that's a documented fact. It's the dollar per kilowatt hour has dramatically reduced, and it continues to go down. And in fact, I can just use a specific example from the document here that basically talks about the battery cost of a 300 kilowatt battery system in a bus being about $850,000 in 2015 to around $730,000 in 2030. I can tell you right now that number has already been beaten, and I'm looking at the NREL report done on Pasadena/Foothill Transit that in 2015 they weren't at 850, they were at 789. Now the one thing we have to take into account is different agencies want to outfit their buses in different fashions, but suffice to say that with a large volume order, I think that New Flyer has already mentioned that as well. With a large volume order from one specific agency where you'd have some kind of certainty on the way you're going to configure it, there are already opportunities to drive that pricing down. And we would be more than happy to come to meet and have some specific examples with knowing the specific kind of configuration that a particular agency would want and the volumes that they would want. We could actually get you some very accurate pricing that we would be willing to commit to, no less, that you could use.
Sir, can you mention your name for people on the phone, please?
Sorry, this is Kent Leacock. That was Kent Leacock from Proterra.
Okay. Yes, Bernie.
Well, just to follow up on Kent's comments, the price per kilowatt hour of batteries in electric vehicles has declined from roughly $1,000 a kilowatt hour in the 2009-2010 period to a current $250 to $300 a kilowatt hour. It's clearly been a 70% decrease in roughly 6 years. And that, as Kent said, that's not stopping. This is absolutely progressing, just like the cost of big screen TVs or laptop computers have declined through a combination of significant investment in R&D and economies of scale with increased volume. Just about everybody who's expert in this, and all the major consulting firms have said it's going to decline another 50% in the next 3 or 4 years, taking us to roughly $125 to $150 per kilowatt hour. That is absolutely happening. Nothing's going to stop it. In addition, there's a double benefit to this decrease in the cost. It will not only benefit the cost, lower cost in the bus, but I heard a few people talk about demand charges. It's in the literature here.
Yeah.
I heard 50% of rates could be demand charges. A very effective strategy to lower those or possibly even eliminate them is the incorporation of energy storage on site. That also is benefiting tremendously by the same reduction in the cost of batteries that we just discussed for the vehicle. So there's a double benefit there that should be taken into consideration in these models.
And it's great that Bernie mentioned that the energy storage on site. At our symposium on the 8th, we'll have experts from EPRI talking about energy storage.
Okay, so I was going to ask a question about that, but I guess I'll defer. But, well, let me ask the question. I don't need the answer. It's like, I am interested in knowing if any of the transits are actually already pursuing and installing a battery-type storage system, because I've heard of that as a topic from some of the transits. I don't know if anybody's actually doing it yet. So I'm not looking for the answer now, so just make sure we can get other people's.
Well, just to be clear, I wouldn't know. I don't sell any of these products. I just refer.
Anybody that's listening, they'll let me know. I'll look to Long Beach in particular because I know that they were exploring some options there.
Yeah, we have some customers due to the sensitivity of the grants being due today. I won't name names, but we do have some people that are interested in doing a combination. Macy with BYD, by the way, of on-site storage, solar, and buses in combination. So hopefully we'll have more to talk about that. I want to compliment Bernie. You're spot on. Kent, you're spot on. The volumes are to Steve's point about is a bus is a bus is a bus. But if overseas we get an order for several thousand buses, you can bet that that's going to impact our battery pricing. That's going to drive it down. So the batteries will benefit from the volumes of overseas, and so you can't trivialize or make that irrelevant. Our plant in Shenzhen this year in 2016 will deliver 7,000 EV buses, and you bet that those 7,000 buses worth of batteries will impact positively the U.S. market. So as Kent said, our prices are already under the $800,000 mark, so the graph here is already outdated, and we'd love to submit new numbers for your consideration.
Yeah, and when I say we want bus prices, every model you have.
You got it.
Articulated, small ones, big ones, everything.
We
do want to look individual bus by bus.
Well, we'll definitely do that.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Speaking of the bus price and also the battery price, this is Yachun Chow from ARB again. Can anybody comment on state of Washington's procurement for up to 800 battery electric buses, how that may actually impact our market price here?
Yeah, Macy, you probably are pretty aware of
that. We've gotten our first few orders off that contract. The bidding, we priced it hoping for the best, that there would be a significant volume on that. It's unfortunate that California doesn't have a reciprocal agreement with the state of Washington, but Oregon does. So we've gotten an order out of Oregon. We've gotten an order out of Washington. So we bid that very aggressively. We're betting on to come that we're going to build a lot of buses and benefit from some volume from that state contract.
And for my benefit, that Washington contract was, in essence, speccing the buses, essentially bidding for the prices, and now any of the transits in Washington and Oregon can buy from that list, in essence.
Correct.
Okay,
that's right.
You. And how long is that good for? A few years? Or?
It's I think it's 3 years with options for 5.
Okay, thank you.
Tony, David Warren from New Flyer. Yeah. Certainly don't disagree with any of the comments that have been made about the price of batteries coming down. It makes perfect sense, and it will definitely benefit the transit industry. But there's more to the batteries than just the cells themselves. There's a battery management system. You have to package the batteries. You have to thermally heat and cool the batteries to get optimum performance. So some of the numbers that are mentioned on the cost of kilowatt per hour may not include some of that. So I just caution you about that. Another comment I want to make is that I haven't had a chance to go through the Foothill report from NREL in great detail, but I did think it was interesting that the electric buses, the range in that study of the buses compared to the baseline study was a lot different. The CNG buses did go further, and that is a fact in the industry. When we build a bus, perhaps for customers such as San Diego MTS, those buses are typically spec'd for a range of 300, 350 miles. Mm-hmm. That's not capable right now with a battery electric bus. Now we can spec multiple manufacturers here at this work group meeting, including New Flyer, can spec buses typically with as little as 80 kilowatts, 100 kilowatt hours of capacity. We can go up into, say, the mid 300s in kilowatt hours. But even at that, consuming, say, 1.8 kilowatt hours per mile, you're not going to get to that 300-mile range.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got different strategies on how to handle this situation. You can put the on-route rapid chargers, which can be, let's say somewhere between 500,000 and 750,000, and then there's architecture and land and all the rest that go with it, to keep the bus essentially running 24 hours a day. But then in your study too, you have to consider that certain times of the day, that bus is going to be idle. It's going to have to charge, even at 400 kilowatt hours. It's, 400 kilowatt or 450 kilowatt charging. That bus will be idle at certain points of the day and not be able to operate. So please don't take my comments as not being supportive of this technology, because clearly we are, and we're very proud of our battery electric bus. But when you do this study, keep in mind that when you look at the price of the bus, it's going to vary between the, on-route charging, which the infrastructure could be very expensive,
mm-hmm.
and then you have to amortize that over the buses, or have the buses be battery dominant and go out for a long period of time and make some of that route. So it's going to be complex. I'm really looking forward, Steve, to seeing your model and how that all works out. Thank you.
No, and I think that's why it's critical, and that's why we have the survey, is to ultimately understand what the transit fleets need, and frankly how their miles are distributed in terms of how they run their buses. So again, we've looked at the National Transit Database and kind of just ranked them based on average miles per week. And so certain transits are averaging more than 200 miles. Most are averaging well below 150 miles. That's still an average. So that would either suggests, if your average is 150, that you pretty much run most of your buses 150 miles a day on average for the year, or half of them do less and half of them do more. We can't see those differences. So I think understanding that distribution is what we're trying to accomplish with the survey. That is in part, so we do recognize that there are technology limitations with battery in particular. And then I think for fuel cells, I think there's some questions to be answered about that, and there is a significant infrastructure investment, or bigger infrastructure investment for that. So I think we're cognizant of those things. That's why but it's important to have a good underpinning of just costs, so that we have the discussion of, is it cost competitive or is it unreasonable cost question, kind of think out of the way, so we could focus more, I think, on the what does it mean for practical service for people? How does it change the way you operate? Clearly, we understand if you're a transit that really has only a single, well, it's not single, but very narrow types of buses in terms of what you operate currently, that is going to be a much bigger shift to then operate buses that have different considerations that you have to have. If you're a transit that already has multiple rail type systems and a variety of different kinds of buses, including the way they're powered, you're already used to that. And so those are going to be those softer costs, if you will, that we want to understand what the implications are. And part of that is, I think, some of the issues we discussed with the transits in the past is, if you kind of have a goal that's too weak, then you'll have a hangar queen, where you might have an advanced technology bus features park because it's more convenient. You don't really use it very much, which isn't very helpful. And if we're too aggressive, then you could potentially have somebody operate a large number of buses that they're not as familiar with, or there might be kinks to be worked out, or just operational changes that may evolve or may be needed. And so we're cognizant of those, and we're looking forward to getting, to me, a little bit sort of past the cost issue and getting more into the survey responses and seeing what does it practically mean, even if the dollar number is not the issue. It's what does it practically mean to run a transit service, and what the implications are.
And this is Yaqin Chao. We had the same question for NRail when they were evaluating the performance. So since NRail is not here today, I'm just going to read a paragraph from their newest report just published yesterday. So the average monthly operating mileage for the battery electric buses for the evaluation period was 2,333 miles, which is about half that of the CNG buses. This is expected, considering that the BEVs are operated primarily on Route 291, and the CNG buses are randomly dispatched on all routes out of the Pomona depot, including express and the commuter routes, which have much higher average speeds. The results presented in this report are based on the planned route for the buses and do not indicate a specific limitation of the technology. I just want to share this part of the report with everyone.
Okay, go ahead and take that, David. Thank you. David and then Paul.
David Soya with PG&E. I just wanted to interject a little bit on hearing about the demand charge being a major part of the operating costs. So I have 2 points to make. One's very specific to the paper that you provided with us, and another more broad point. First, the specific to the paper, I see the estimate is something around $16,000 a year to charge the buses. That seems to me to be a cost that looks like something with the demand charge waiver in place. So I'm happy to, outside of this meeting, put you in touch with people in our rates department to discuss the assumptions you're using here and how that demand charge waiver may actually impact.
So I want to touch on that. So the assumption in the example is the 20 cents, period. So however you get to the 20 cents, whether it's flat or peak demand or on average, it's just that number.
Okay.
That simple. So if a better representation for any entity is 30 cents or 25 because of the way they're charged, we would reflect that.
Yeah.
And we've already met with your folks. We gave them our spreadsheet. They confirmed that the way we looked at it makes sense. The chart actually at the end, actually I'll skip ahead to it, is simply looking at standard rate schedules. And I think for PG&E it's ES or E19, E or S, I can't remember which one. And the 3 bars represents a strategy where you would use a 500 kilowatt charger during the day only and not at night, kind of Proterra style. The other represents 5 buses being charged at 80 kilowatt chargers each at night only and not during the day. So you'd have the nighttime rates, and the peaks would be based on the usage at that point, all on separate meters, so it's not included with the existing property. And then the last one is if you, in essence, were to have a 500 kilowatt load 24/7, what the rate would look like. So all 3 bars are the exact same rate schedule. It really varies depending on your strategy. I think that's where the comment about the battery storage could obviously, if you're only using the equipment half the time, you're not amortizing your equipment as well as you could. But practically speaking, given certain strategies, you won't be able to. Other situations, you may be able to use storage, so you can potentially manage those rates. But while you're here, so one of the issues is the waivers. So Stockton.
Well, the other more broad point I wanted to make is PG&E is a large supporter of transport electrification. We've got a number of initiatives going in that area. However, we have a second very important charge for the state, which is long-term sustainability of the grid infrastructure. We want to maintain it in a safe, reliable, and affordable way for all of our customers. And the demand charge has a very specific utility in that area. It is to pay for the wear and tear on the grid by high-demand users of the electrical service. So we feel like the demand charge waiver is a hidden subsidy, and subsidies may be needed in the near term for electric buses, but it's a hidden subsidy in rates, which, if expanded across a large number of transit districts in the state, could balloon to millions of dollars that are direct subsidies that have to be accounted for in maintaining the electrical infrastructure. So we would like ARB to suggest that ARB explores a few different options to a direct demand charge waiver. One, if subsidies are needed, we'd prefer a very transparent type of subsidy that allows transit districts to recognize the subsidy that they're receiving to begin long-term planning for those subsidies being removed. And then we would also like to explore other ways that the utility could support transport electrification for public transit. We've come up with a few ideas, which would be things like on-bill financing. Those might be options that would assist transit authorities in helping with the upfront cost of adopting electric buses. We'd like to look at a number of the technology options that people have raised today, things like distributed generation coupled with storage. And then the final one, which I think the transit authorities are probably very well positioned to conduct on their own, but we'd be happy to support, would be logistical options to make sure that their fleets are running in a way that minimizes the demand charge, but still allows service in the way that their customers expect. So we would just like to, to put forth that the demand charge does have a very important role to play in maintaining the electrical grid that's going to be needed to support long-term transit. Electric transit, and that there are a number of other options to explore besides just a blanket waiver of that charge, which could be very expensive and represent a very large cost shift from some of our customers to others who support the electric grid.
Okay, so in that vein, what I hear there is, so we'll use the PG&E E19 where appropriate, just standard rates for PG&E customers or transits. But is there any potential work or future efforts to address, I forgot the bill, but basically to support electrification?
SB 350.
SB 350 in particular. I'm trying to learn, is there something in the future that may be looking at what the impacts potentially are on the grid? To some degree they may be beneficial. And if that's reflected in the cost, then in theory those costs would be lower and potential. Is there any proceedings, any discussions in that vein occurring?
I'm not sure I fully understood your question. The impacts of SB 350 on the reliability and cost of the electric grid are certainly being taken into account in the long-term procurement planning process at the PUC to determine what are the impacts on local resource capacity requirements in different areas and the cost of electricity across the state. I'm not sure that's entirely answering your question. As I think you know, the electric transport section of the SB 350 was very modified towards the end of the legislative session. There are words encouraging transport electrification in 350. The largest area that's impacted PG&E in our direct advocacy for transport electrification has been mostly in the area of charging infrastructure for light duty, not so much in the heavy duty and transit spaces. That's not to say we're not interested and involved, but in terms of actual direct action for the moment, light duty has been the area that we've been most directly involved.
Okay, appreciate that.
And we do have one comment coming in from the email. I'll just read it out. This is Clinton Bench, Director of Fleet and Transit from UCLA. While UCLA does not have plans yet to charge buses from electricity stored in batteries, we're strongly considering an expansion of our light-duty vehicle smart charging program to new electric buses that we are purchasing. In other words, charging could be suspended or reduced at peak times. Priority could be given to vehicles soon to be put in service, and electricity could even be sent back to the grid from the buses if practical.
Thank you for that comment. Paul?
Couple things. I can't wait to watch these buses come down in price. In 1990, we were buying buses for $100,000 a piece. Today, they're over $500,000. So I really have to look at that jaundicely. But I want to touch on a couple of things because, you start to look at these costs. And, I can do, and we're working with Steve's group, you just look at bus cost, maintenance, and fuel. And fuel is an important component to this discussion because it is so high. And in San Diego, it's over double what we're spending right now. But just looking at those three things and using documents that we have, because we've talked to the electric bus manufacturers, I can show you a case where the 12-year cost is 30% higher with electric. not only that, and I'm sure we can whittle that around, but you've got this infrastructure issue that is very big and a big question mark. Certainly with slow charge. And slow charge, I think, allows us the greatest flexibility in trying to operate as we do now. But this whole idea of how you take a 250 bus operation and what it's going to cost and what it's going to take, and whether the electric company can in fact deliver that kind of power to a facility are all question marks that we have to ask questions of now in light of this regulation that we're saying it's going to be mandatory in just a couple of years. I think the last point, and David kind of touched on it, but I want to really talk about this more, because we know if we take a battery bus, a slow charge, it has limitations in terms of range. That's no secret, and we can argue about the amount, but we actually put our scheduling group together, took a battery bus, put it into trying to schedule service using a 125-mile range. This is on a 40-foot bus. We would need 25% more buses in order to make that happen because of the changeout required. And so, when we talk about the cost of the bus and ownership, we have to make sure it's not just the cost of the bus and fuel and maintenance, it's the total cost impact to transit that we have to deal with. And this idea of limitations on the technology and what it can operate relative to what we're doing now are very, very real.
So I'll just make a comment there. So clearly that's where we want to understand what the potential impacts are on the transit. And then I guess I'd ask the question, is your 25% more buses required? That, to me, I would presume, looking at your routes, that some routes that would not be the case, and others, they wouldn't necessarily meet your needs at all. Right. And I think that's a critical part of what we're trying to understand, is like, if you're doing 10% of your fleet, 5% of your fleet, those issues might not come up because you can figure out what the best one is. For certain transits, it's we're going to electrify a particular route. That makes the most sense, not to dispatch buses in a particular way.
Well, I used one.
And at some point it becomes impractical given the existing technology. And we are talking a really long time frame. And so what we're trying to do, and this is kind of more on the rule construct, which is maybe more of a workshop thing, that's where we try to identify what are mechanisms that can address those barriers in the rule so that they don't become a requirement, even though, because of the situation you're in. So the example you just mentioned was, let's say you can get enough electricity to your site that would supply up to a third of the buses, but no more. And there's whatever the barriers are permitting other issues. Then at that point, that would be the kind of thing we'd look at. It's like, all right, if you kind of did your best case and the utility can't get it there because of who knows what the reason is, and you can't operate more on electric, and that's really your only choice, then by rule design, we would want to build something in and say, hey, you're off the hook. Now somebody else, they can do them all.
Fair enough.
That would be okay. I mean, and I think that would provide you more of that market certainty, if you will, or planning ahead. And then David and others would then produce that 300-mile bus, and then their problem solved that doesn't use as much energy and half as much, then great. Wait, so before I go to you, there's somebody back here who's been raising their hand for some time.
Thank you, Tony. Ray Pingle from Sierra Club, California. I just wanted to echo the many comments on how battery costs are coming down much more dramatically than is included in the assumption of your handout, which is very unrealistically conservative. And so would really recommend that, an early task would be to take a look at that and get it at least closer. LG Chem, for example, signed a contract with General Motors for the new Chevy Bolt, which will be delivered at the end of this year at $145 a kilowatt hour. So battery cost forecasts, I think, is something to really focus on. Another thing is the cost of electricity. And of course, there's a lot of ways to generate cost of electricity, but one of which we've touched on, having battery storage. There are many businesses for several years now that have had batteries installed from like LG Chem, from STEM, Green Charge Networks, that have very much mitigated the demand charges. And then the third thing is that many transit agencies, either physically or virtually, will be able to install their own solar and probably with storage, which will actually reduce their costs. So I think those are all factors that need to be focused in: battery costs as well as cost of electricity.
Okay, so I want to encourage anybody with information in those regards, by all means, send them our way. We'll try to put it together. I think that's going to be one of the homework assignments since we're kind of running out of time, and actually we're trying to have some coordination meetings on the symposium. We'll have to leave. That's why Yachin left. But yeah, anybody who has information, even the studies we refer to, it would be great if we can get those and synthesize those for the next meeting.
So just going back to Paul's point real quickly, because there's a corollary to that. Paul talks about 25% more buses. If that's how this plays out, there'll be systems that can't afford that, and so there'll be reductions in service, which now bring in SB 375 and problems with that. And so over here, we've reduced emissions from buses, but we've reduced bus service in the process, and there's a net loss at the end of the day.
Understood, Rick. And
I know you understand that, and I'm saying this for the rest of the folks in this room.
No, and we're not going to go there. So you guys have to help us to a degree. It's like, what are these situations that we can make real clear so that you can understand that for your situation, here's what you need to plan for, and here's the situation that you know you're not going to have an issue. Again, looking at the distribution of the different transits, there's some that do extremely high miles. I can't imagine that some of the existing technology can serve them today. Others, 30%, 40% is going to be no big deal today, and in some cases 100% today. And so we want to build those things because if we ultimately negatively impact service, that's counterproductive for our basic goal. And so that's, again, one of the messages that I want to make sure is clear. But figuring out how to do that and what the details are associated with that is something we're going to need to understand when we're trying to craft some language that kind of avoids those issues. And so, again, we're committed to it. And that's why the Transit Agency Subcommittee is very important, because the transits are the ones who are going to have to figure out how to manage it. They obviously know their own situation best. And the better we understand the issues, then the more likely we can address them in advance. So if they do occur, that there's a mechanism to handle them without having to stay a rule or go back and change it and provide more uncertainty that way. So that's our goal, to do that. So I guess sort of in closing, since the time is up, as far as we kind of identified some items here in bullets, it's not a very complete list, but obviously we discussed quite a few items. I just wanted to kind of touch on next meeting. Again, since we're at this point, the group is quite large. We'll be contacting everybody. I think we'll be proposing a date out in the relatively near future. But because we're updating the board in February and trying to do workshops in April, I'm not sure if there is a need or desire to do another meeting before the workshops or shortly thereafter. So when we do workshops, again, we'll be, I think, providing more information, painting the picture a little bit, but also seeing if we're at a point that we can have something that you can throw your spaghetti at the wall, kind of say, okay, those are something I can actually do numbers for. I could understand if you're being way more aggressive than what you're expecting or a lot less aggressive than what you're expecting, and that might frame the way you approach the concerns or questions, because I think that's going to matter a lot. So I guess for us, one of the things we'll want to do is see if we can get information on how the battery storage systems work, what a more reasonable way to estimate future bus costs is really the interest, but if doing that by using battery prices is the way to do it, I think we'll try to pull together more information. We weren't sure if using light-duty trends was appropriate necessarily for heavy-duty. I'd like to get a little bit of feedback on the battery manufacturers or even the people who are buying them and putting them in their vehicles, if that's appropriate. The O&M stuff, the transit agency subcommittees trying to work out. And then we're also, I think, to the extent that there's information on here, such as just station costs, including natural gas, that we'd like to have some pretty good numbers to say, look, a station costs this much for this volume. That's a good representation. Again, if you already have CNG, then we wouldn't be using that. But if you don't, because I think some of the comments we've heard are, should convert to CNG, then it's like, well, if we're going to convert to it, then there's going to be infrastructure you have to factor in so that we can do appropriate comparison if that's a situation to be represented. So I guess with that, I'll say I'll thank everybody for actually traveling here. And
Can I make one last comment, Tony?
Yeah, I'll say I'll take any last comments.
For the record, I stated that you claimed a 3-year payback in May. It was actually 7 years, page 21 of the document.
Okay.
7 years.
But that was just an example. It wasn't, here is everything. And then do we include funding in that one or no? And obviously funding is a big part of the picture. So I think by the time we meet again as a group,
That included
we'll have
funding.
We'll address some of the funding. It did? It did include funding?
I believe so, just
okay,
not.
so that was factoring in some funding too. So,
Just not
and we'll be
correctly.
looking at that as part of our strategy.
Thanks for hosting this, Tony.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you so much. No, because I mean, to me, the fundamental thing is.
I'm not going. I'd like to go.